It's 1990, and 31-year-old Peggy Marshall is bursting with hope.
Come on in, Mr. Stone.
Peggy was probably the kindest, most generous person that I know. Very gregarious, happy.
So let's see what we have here.
She just loved life, absolutely loved life.
Armed with a degree in physiotherapy, she starts a geriatric clinic in her adopted hometown of Newport Beach, California.
Oh, if you spend half as much time stretching as you do wooing the ladies, you wouldn't be so tight here.
She enjoyed working with the elderly. She had a good knack for that, good personality to interact with them.
Okay, so sit down. We'll see what I can
She
do.
just loved helping other people. That was kind of her gift in life, and she loved what she was doing.
Peggy is passionate about her work, but what she really wants is someone to love.
She had dated lots of people, but she was really looking for somebody to settle down with at that point and to build a life with and kind of get out of that dating scene.
She gets her wish before long when she spots the man of her dreams. 24-year-old volleyball ace Eric Beckler is a poster boy for Southern California living.
He looked like a Newport Beach guy. Muscular, he worked out.
Very athletic, perfect physique, perfect brain, perfect everything.
He was a good-looking guy, and she noticed that right away.
Eric, this is my friend Peggy.
Hey,
Hi.
you play?
Well, it depends what you're playing.
Oh, I like her.
Yeah, I thought you would.
So we watched him play volleyball, and, you know, she was really interested in him. And so that night, we went on to a party together, and it didn't really matter that they were at a big party, weren't really socializing with a lot of other people, but really spending that time together.
Hey.
Wow, that was fast.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You are quite the athlete.
I can be.
I'm training for the triathlon next month. Have you ever done one of those?
Shut up. You serious?
Yeah.
Okay, we are totally training together.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm serious. Like, we're doing this. It's a real thing.
All right. I will join to that. To training together.
She was also into sports. She was quite a swimmer and into water activities, so that attracted him right away to her.
Triathlon?
Yeah. I'm a swimmer.
Really?
Yeah.
That's like my weakest event.
Really?
Yeah.
I think they found they had a lot in common.
But there's more to their budding relationship than sports. Just months after meeting, Peggy moves Eric into her Newport Beach apartment.
Eric had basically a pair of volleyball shorts to his name.
So he went from nothing to having a stability, a good life, living in a nice area when he met Peggy.
Your shorts? You mean this rag?
Right.
I'm going to use them to wash my car.
Years. Thank you very much.
Eric could see that Peggy was very successful, that she had her own business, that she was doing really well.
Some men may not like that. Some men may have no problem with that.
Peggy and Eric make it work, no matter who wears the shorts.
Eric made Peggy feel really desired.
She is so into Eric that living together just isn't enough.
Peggy hired Eric really quickly. She thought, well, this is one more way that he can spend some time with her.
He did the books mostly and helped with little things around the company.
Check it out. You just enter your revenues here and your expenses there.
I knew there was more to you than just good looks.
They each had their separate talents and strengths and made the business grow quite rapidly.
Another thing that's growing is their bank account.
They were successful and they had plenty of money to spend.
They spent it on clothes, they spent it on vacations, they spent it on dinners, they spent it on furniture, they spent it on a lot of different things.
And so all of a sudden, Eric's whole world, changed and got a lot bigger and a lot better.
And Peggy even lets him manage some of the money, as if it were his own.
They had totally separate accounts and they would split the bills.
In other words, Eric wrote checks for some things and Peggy wrote the checks for others.
When they get engaged, it's all on her.
You like it?
I love it.
Peggy bought her own engagement ring because Eric didn't have the money.
Don't worry, I'll pay you back.
Maybe you should buy yourself a new pair of shorts first.
Done.
Being a big romantic wasn't him, it wasn't his style.
Psychotherapist Stacy Kaiser and forensic psychologist Brian Russell are concerned about the couple's relationship to money.
The potential for problems with Peggy and Eric at this point are that Peggy could be resentful that she is making more money, and that Eric could be resentful that she's making more money. And oftentimes, men will feel emasculated, not manly enough, if they aren't the breadwinner. And so I would worry about that as well.
Usually ambitious women like Peggy tend to want a similarly ambitious guy. They tend to not have as much respect for or attraction to a guy who does not also seem to be kind of a go-getter like them. Now, there is an exception, and the exception is the woman who sort of likes that she's got sort of a leash on a guy by having him be sort of dependent on her. And that may be what we see here happening.
Peggy is 8 years ahead of him on the career track. And so it's possible that over time he could step up his game and begin to work more and play less.
But so far, Eric isn't really showing me any interest in doing that.
That doesn't stop Peggy from having the wedding she's always wanted.
They went to Germany and got married in a castle. She wore a beautiful dress. Her whole family went with her, which was very important to her. It was really the wedding of her dreams.
And almost right away, Peggy gets pregnant. Much to Eric's relief, having a baby doesn't change their lifestyle too much.
They continued to do a lot of all the same things that they did. They would just take her with them whenever they went to the beach.
Parenthood suits them so well, they have a second child 1 year later, and soon relocate to a house on scenic Cliff Drive, which they buy for just under $1 million.
It overlooked all the bay, so they had a beautiful view. It was a gorgeous home.
Peggy and Eric Beckler were the quintessential Newport Beach couple. They really led the life that everyone would want to lead.
But it's not all as perfect as it seems.
I think it was really hard for Peggy. She didn't get a lot of sleep. It really kind of began to wear on her a bit because she was doing it all, you know.
I feel stuck, you know? Like I'm in prison sometimes.
He used to call her controlling and demanding.
She was on my case, like, be home, do this, do that. I just wish it was like the way it was before. I feel you, man. I feel you.
If you look on the other side, you know, she had children and a business running, and he wanted to go play with his friends.
Controlling or not,
What's this?
what's certain is that Peggy's marriage to Eric
I get to decide when we sell it.
has hit rough waters.
They both spent a great deal of money.
This is my business.
Sometimes a great offer is too hard to refuse.
Peggy and Eric Beckler are healthy, wealthy, and good-looking. But while Peggy devotes all of her energy to raising their 2 kids, Eric's preoccupations lie elsewhere.
Hey, man. Awesome game, bro.
Yeah.
So, what's up? You going home, or?
Yeah, Peggy's waiting for me.
Eric was just a volleyball player. You know, that's what the life he had, and I think he wanted it back.
Anyway, I'll give it right home.
Juggling fatherhood with beach life becomes even harder when Peggy gives birth to their 3rd child.
She wanted a large family. She came from an amazing family with brothers and sisters, and she wanted that for herself.
Peggy's dream, however, comes at a price.
2 is a handful, and then 3 is almost impossible when they're all that little.
I'm coming! Just a minute.
Can you help me, please? Can you just clean this mess? I'll be back. I'm coming!
Desperate for a break, the couple attempts to solve the problem by hiring not 1, but 2 nannies.
one during the weekdays and one on the weekends.
But the extra help at home is all the excuse Eric needs to go out even more.
She did the cooking and the cleaning, and she went to work, and she brought home the money.
And Eric is happy to spend it.
He would leave and go down and play volleyball at the beach for hours, and not come home for 6 hours.
Cheers, brother. Cheers.
She would call looking for him, and then he wouldn't answer the phone.
Dude, your phone, you gonna get that? Don't worry about it. It's probably just Peggy.
It's a lifestyle that has a high price tag attached.
They had, at the time, 2 nannies. They had 3 kids, and they had Porsches, and they lived on a beautiful home in Newport Beach. And I can only imagine what the cost of all of that might be.
It's all about Newport Beach, what you have and what you ostentatious, what you can show off. And very few people can maintain that.
Hey, hey.
What's this?
Six months behind.
What? 6 months on what?
Everything.
He was supposed to be paying the mortgage. He was not paying the mortgage. He was just trying to catch up from the months before till it came a point in time where they were really running out of money.
Where did all the money go, Eric?
Where'd it go? We spend a lot.
They both spent a great deal of money. Peggy spent a great deal of money, and Eric spent money as well.
We got this. Okay? We'll get it back. We got this.
Yeah.
It was like, things are getting a little tight here, and we need to make some adjustments.
Just when things are at their worst, Peggy catches a lucky break.
Eric and Peggy were approached by another company to buy them out because they were very successful.
Peggy was torn by that because it was her baby, her business.
I don't know that Peggy wanted to see her company go someplace else.
But Eric doesn't see it that way.
No, I don't want to talk about
Would
it.
you just listen to reason for 1 second?
This is my business, not ours.
Basically, he wanted to just get rid of all the issues, all the hassles, and just enjoy the money and not have to work.
Get back to work.
I think that Eric and Peggy probably disagree about accepting this buyout offer because Eric tends to be more of a short-term gratification guy. Peggy's a little bit more of a long-term, gradual business builder. It may be that Peggy sees the loss of the control of the business as sort of a failure.
Career and financial stressors are 2 of the greatest sources of conflict in a marital relationship. So that combination, along with the rest of the stress they have going in their lives, is not going to be good for their relationship.
No, I don't want to look at the offer again. I read it. I am not interested. Don't you get it? I get to decide when we sell it. It's not yours. Just leave me alone.
Look, I know it's your business, but are you really gonna turn your back on $1 million?
Eric, it's just money. I don't care. It's my business. Do you understand?
Sometimes a great offer is too hard to refuse.
Okay, fine. We will sell the business. Happy?
There is a silver lining.
So, how's it going?
The new buyers wanted them to stay on and run the company. So there was a win-win for everybody.
Things are looking up. For a little while, anyway.
It was supposed to be a special night. I made him dinner and I don't know what else to do.
Peg, you're not doing anything wrong.
Then where is he?
Peggy called me and was crying and upset and, wanted to know why Eric was gone all the time and where was he going.
I just want him to come home,
I think she had serious questions about if he was cheating.
With the marriage in a shambles, Peggy's career also suffers a serious blow.
I don't understand. What exactly are you accusing me of?
There were rumors that there was some fraud going on in the Medicare billing process.
It's easy. Check it out.
Eric Beckler was doing the books at that time.
I don't know if they were billing for patients that they weren't seeing, but the billing was for services not rendered.
Her company may have been draining its clients' Medicare providers for years, and someone needs to be held accountable.
I don't know if she felt it was her fault or her responsibility, but she was quite concerned about it. The new owners of the company found that it was unacceptable and had to let them both go.
They could basically fire them as executives, and that's eventually what they did just several months after they bought the business.
What's going on, babe?
Don't talk to me.
She was very unhappy about that. She was very depressed, and marriage had been bad for a while. The business.
And with the fraud investigation in the hands of authorities, there's no telling what will happen.
She was afraid she was going to be arrested. So I'm sure Peggy was under a lot of stress.
That was the time that things started falling apart in her life.
And those things are about to get worse, much worse.
She wanted to be super desired by Eric.
There was a person screaming hysterically in the water, basically nonsensical, just screaming and screaming.
After Peggy and Eric Beckler's company is bought out, Peggy is investigated for fraud. On the home front, things aren't much better.
She had concerns about their relationship. It wasn't going well.
She wanted Eric to love her the way that she loved him.
Nothing.
She wanted Eric to want to spend time with her the way that she wanted to spend time with him. I don't think that he had those same feelings for her. And her MO wasn't to confront, are you having an affair? Are you seeing somebody else? Her whole thing was, if he might be, how can I improve myself so that he won't want to go there?
The answer is right under Peggy's nose.
She had breast implants. I'm like, Peggy, why? And she just really said, I want to be the best that I can be, because she wanted to be super desired by Eric.
It's very difficult to control somebody else's behavior by changing yourself. And I'm worried that she is blaming herself for things that aren't her fault and making major, expensive efforts that are probably futile.
If a person wants to cheat, they cheat. It doesn't matter if they have the hottest wife with the best breasts, who's the best mother. If Eric is desiring to be with other women, it has absolutely nothing to do with Peggy in the end. It has to do with Eric and his moral compass.
But the implants serve their purpose, and Eric is so thrilled with Peggy's new body that the couple ships the kids off with the nanny and throws a party.
They were celebrating how happy they were together. They had a party with over 200 guests.
If you saw Peggy, she was, happy and gregarious and all of those things.
It's the breath of fresh air the couple needs, and Peggy and Eric's second wind is only just beginning.
Eric said, I have a babysitter. I'm taking you out to celebrate our anniversary, and she didn't know where she was going. He packed everything, so she had no idea.
Today's your day. Come on, let's go.
It was a surprise, and I think she was looking forward to getting away.
He was taking her to Catalina.
They were going to have a fun, romantic getaway out in the water.
It's gonna be so much fun.
Just the two of them.
Peggy probably thought, oh my gosh, Eric's doing something for me, and, we're making progress, and everything's going to be okay.
Until tragedy strikes. Hours later, passengers on a yacht spot Peggy and Eric's empty motorboat spinning in circles 4 miles off the shore. And that's not all they see.
Peggy, where are you?
There was a person and a boogie board screaming hysterically in the water, basically nonsensical, just screaming and screaming, and so they called for the Coast Guard.
It's Eric, and he has quite a story to tell.
While they were out in the boat, he said they had drank margaritas.
We had a couple of drinks. We had sex twice.
That was good.
The margaritas weren't bad either. And then we decided to go home, and I told Peggy I wanted the boogie board. And this huge wave came and threw me into the water. When I came to the surface, I couldn't see Peggy in the boat anymore. I figured she just got knocked into the water also. Peggy, where are you? I just stayed there, hoping she'd surface. She didn't. The boat was just going off on its own. I just kept shouting out her name, but I didn't hear anything. I couldn't just leave her. So I stayed there. Peggy! An hour and a half, waiting. That's when the boat showed up.
The news hits Peggy's friends and family hard.
Okay, I'll call you back.
A friend of mine called me very early and said, Glenda, have you read the newspaper? And I said, no. And she said, Peggy's missing. And there was an article in the paper that said that, Peggy was missing and fallen off a boat.
There is hope.
The Coast Guard did an extensive search, and they had aircraft, they had seacraft that did a complex search of the area.
They were able to use submarines to look for her, and her family was also out in boats looking for her, and they couldn't find her.
We kept up the hope, she's going to make it. And after about 3 days, I was starting to be really concerned.
After searching for Peggy for 5 days, the Coast Guard calls off the search. They can only assume the worst. Peggy is gone. With no body to bury, a memorial is held a few days later. Soon after, Peggy's parents take the kids in. The search may be over, but the investigation is not. Something about Eric's story doesn't ring true.
The ocean was not choppy on that date. The ocean was very calm, in fact.
She was such a strong swimmer, and I thought there was no way that Peggy could have drowned. Absolutely no way.
So based on that, they contacted the Sheriff's Department's Homicide Division, and then we started looking into the incident.
It's like I told the Coast Guard, that wave must have just knocked her off, And now my kids, we're all alone without her.
His grief seemed genuine.
I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Beckler. Really, I am.
He was saying all the right things, but it didn't make sense that his wife would disappear in the water. It was a very calm day.
At the same time, a theory begins floating around Newport Beach that Peggy faked her own death.
The rumor was that she was afraid she was going to go to federal prison for fraud and is living somewhere in the Caribbean having nice drinks or something.
So, is Peggy on the run?
The investigation was serious, and the consequences could have been very severe.
She disappeared and went to Europe.
While under investigation for fraud, Peggy Beckler goes missing. Is she on the lam, or did she drown in the Pacific? Without a body or any leads, the case goes cold.
I had no idea what happened to Peggy. Absolutely none.
Embarrassing her family would be awful to Peggy.
People may go to prison for 10 or 15 years for the nature of the fraud that was involved. The investigation was serious, and the consequences could have been very severe because Peggy really ran the business. The focus of the investigation was directed towards her.
Who knows, Peggy might have just swam ashore and is living a happy life somewhere else.
Meanwhile, Eric continues to grieve.
Peggy was considered missing at sea, and Eric was a distraught husband who lost his wife.
I just couldn't even imagine going through that.
Within months, money is running out, and Eric decides to reinvent himself as a website designer.
Eric started an internet business, and he went to a trade show to promote his services, his company.
He needed a model to attract attention to his booth, so he asked a photographer friend of his to send a gal.
Enter model and part-time actress Tina New.
I was hired to work at a trade show for him, and he was really, really nice, real respectful.
And consequently, that's how Tina ended up there.
He told me that his wife had died in a tragic boat accident 3 months before, and so I automatically felt sorry for him.
It's a nice restaurant by the pier. You hungry?
Yeah, okay, let's go.
Great. Somewhere around.
Eric is a welcome change for Tina.
Thanks.
She had been involved in some in the past dysfunctional relationships involving drugs and alcohol.
Eric Beckler was a breath of fresh air for her because he was a good guy.
But is Tina the right girl for Eric?
Tina New did have a past. She was convicted of a fraud, and she did have some past run-ins with the law.
When I met Eric, I had just started using drugs, and I took myself into a detox place and said, I need to go get help. You know, I'm gonna fix my life. And my car's in the shop because I got in a car accident. My electricity is shut off. My pager goes off, and it's this job to work for Eric. So he was just my hero. And, you know, he and I were together from that point on.
Like in a symphony. If you forget what you're doing, you just...
He took her on cruises, they wined and dined. I think their happiness was very evident to the community and to their closest friends.
What's also evident is how quickly Eric is moving on.
I think that was a bit of a puzzle as to how someone who had just lost his wife less than 3 months ago could be so happy again.
People have different ways that they deal with their grief, and each individual has to answer for the manner in which they deal with these traumatic events.
So just gray hairs.
The fact that Eric is willing to move on so quickly suggests to me a pretty profound selfishness. Is awfully quick for a husband who supposedly was happy with the marriage as it was when Peggy disappeared.
I look at Eric and Tina's relationship, and I see that Tina is a mess and doesn't have her life in order, and Eric is a mess and doesn't have his life in order. So to me, it's just two messes making an even bigger mess.
I think that neither Eric nor Tina is really in a good place to even know if they can build a solid foundation for a long-term relationship at this point.
Indeed, this foundation is anything but solid. Eric's new business bites the dust after just a year, and so do his finances.
The Porsche payment, the insurance, and the house payment. He went months without paying any of those, and he lost the house. And then we moved into a condo.
And with pressures mounting, Eric and Tina's new condo is far from the happy home they'd hoped for.
They had sort of a dysfunctional relationship where they'd fight, make up, fight, and eventually she filed a police report and he got put on probation because of that.
Eric's slapped with a restraining order, but he soon violates it.
What are you doing here? Eric, you know you're not supposed to be here.
This is my place.
The hell it is, Eric. I want you out. Get out.
I'm not going anywhere.
Eric, come on, you're scaring me. You know you're not supposed to be here, please.
Come on, stop being ridiculous. Where are my shorts?
I don't know where your shorts are.
Where are my shorts?
I got rid of them, okay? They're gone.
They got into a huge argument, and it was so loud that the neighbors ended up going ahead and calling the police.
You expecting somebody?
Yeah, the cops.
Come on. You watch yourself, bitch.
He did not want to be caught there because of the restraining orders, so he took off.
Hi, detective. Come on in.
Early on, I had given Tina a business card.
Okay, look, I've got something to tell you about Eric. Something nobody else knows.
And that's when we started really working with Tina.
Okay, so this is what happened. We were out clubbing one night, and Eric's buddy brought over some X. And when we got home, we were both still really high, and I turned to Eric, like out of the blue, like something hit me, and I said, "You killed her."
Why would you say that?
I know. I think a part of me has always known.
To this day, I don't know why I said what I said, because I said, oh my God, you hit her over the head.
Tina's story to police is that Eric is responsible for Peggy's death. And he used the party they threw as an elaborate ruse so he could kill her.
He planned this big party 2 days before so everybody could see how happy they were and how good they were getting along.
He and Peggy were out taking the boating trip on their anniversary, and they had a couple of drinks, and they had sex a couple of times.
And moments later, Eric sneaks up to her and kills her.
And so I'm sitting there laying next to him going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
But there's a problem with Tina's admission.
What Eric told you isn't enough to put him away.
They were taking drugs which are mind-altering. So that played a very large part in this alleged confession and makes it very unreliable.
Since it's all hearsay, Detective Murphy needs more from Tina than Eric's drug-addled confession.
Listen to me. I need you to help us. Peggy needs you.
Tina agreed to be an informant for the sheriff's department.
But nobody's prepared for what Tina's about to find out.
How do I know you're not going to hurt me?
He thought that would excite her.
Eric Beckler loses his wife Peggy in a tragic boating accident. But 2 years later, his new girlfriend Tina points the finger at him. Did Eric really do it? Or is Tina just setting him up for a fall? Police aren't sure what to think, except this isn't the first time someone's accused Eric. His best friend Toby Baker has quite a story of his own. It seems Eric made a startling revelation just 4 months before Peggy's disappearance.
Thinking about getting rid of Peggy. You mean like divorcing her? No, that's not what I mean. Like killing her, dropping her body in the ocean. You're joking, right? Dude, you're not serious, are you?
And that's when his friend just said, don't even want to hear that.
Months later, he contacted our office with his lawyer, and he wanted to amend his statement. He was concerned about possibly facing criminal charges because he wasn't cooperating on an investigation.
At the same time, police dismissed the idea Peggy faked her own death to evade fraud charges.
I don't think there was any merit to this fraud investigation. I think at most it would have involved a fine, so there was nothing to run away from.
With both Toby and Tina coming forward, Detective Murphy might have a case.
Would you say yes to wearing a wire?
You mean like in the movies?
Tina agrees to meet Eric once more, only this time she's playing for keeps.
You need to tell me more about Peggy.
What? What do you want to know?
I don't know, just stuff, you know? It's important.
We were monitoring the statements in a vehicle in the parking lot of the restaurant. At the same time we're hearing them real time, we're recording them.
It's important to me, if you want to be with me, that I know what happened between you two.
All right. Ask away.
What happened that night? divorcing her would have been easier.
Easier, yes. Maybe. Better? No.
He says if we got divorced, she would get the money, and that wasn't an option for me.
You okay?
Yeah, it's just hot in here.
She was concerned through the whole meal that a wire was going to show or he was going to see something. And then she asked him,
So who's to say that I won't be next?
There won't be a next time. I swear.
And he said, Tina, I promise I will never do anything like that ever again, is what he said.
Ever again is tantamount to a confession. And that's when the cops know they have their man.
we knew that the DA would file charges based on that.
Okay.
So a toast to us.
But arresting Eric is easier said than done.
The plan was I was supposed to drop off Eric, but the problem is, since I was drinking, Eric says, "You've been drinking, let me drive," and he takes my car keys and he takes control of the car. And he starts driving me on a freeway, and I have no idea where I'm going. And I'm thinking, I am dead. So I start listing the streets on the freeway. I'm like, why are you going here? Why are you on Valley View Boulevard?
Eric, pull over. It's my car. I can drive myself home.
What the heck is wrong with you?
You want to be with me? Then get out of the stupid ass car.
Okay.
He pulls over and he gets out.
After they left the restaurant, we ended up following them, and when they separated, we ended up arresting Eric.
Eric Beckler, you're under arrest for the murder of your wife, Peggy.
Are you serious?
Really?
When the case goes to trial nearly 3 years after Peggy's disappearance, Eric pleads not guilty.
One of the most unique aspects of the case was that there was not a shred of physical evidence. There was no blood on the boat.
It would be extremely difficult to completely sanitize a boat on the high seas after an attack as described by Tina. Then they searched the boat from stem to stern.
The defense argues that Eric made up his confession to Tina.
There won't be a next time.
Eric Beckler didn't deny that he had told her that.
I swear.
His story was that, he was just trying to be a bad boy because he thought that would excite her.
But even without Peggy's body, the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming.
I did. I hit her over the head with a dumbbell. Threw her overboard. With 70 pounds of weight.
Eric told Tina knew that he weighted his wife down with 70 pounds worth of weights, and 2 35-pound dumbbells were missing from his weight rack at home.
And this was not in the area that the Harbor Patrol was looking. It was 8 to 12 miles out to sea.
Meaning the Coast Guard search never stood a chance.
It's a big ocean out there. And then he drove back into the mouth of the harbor, 4 miles out, and that's where he set up the boating incident.
And that's when he jumped off the boat and waited for someone to come.
Peggy! Eric's motivation is as simple and as old as the color green.
Eric and Peggy had $2 million life insurance for each of them, and also they had some insurance on the children.
A month and a half before the boating incident, Peggy wanted to change the beneficiary to her children and take Eric off them.
No, he should no longer be listed as a beneficiary.
Hey, babe.
Yeah, Glenda, okay. 9 o'clock tomorrow. Okay, bye.
What's up, dude?
Just talking to Glenda.
That kind of tells you what's going on in her mind about her trust of Eric Beckler, and he did not know that at the time of her death.
But the prosecution's most valuable asset is Tina.
I said to them, no matter what I've done personally, before or after, has nothing to do with the fact that he killed his wife.
On February 1st, 2001, Eric Beckler is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole.
Based on what the prosecution presented as evidence, they did prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it.
He never seemed all that attached to Peggy. He certainly did not seem attached or interested in his kids. And it is that lack of attachment that enabled him to go and kill her because he doesn't have a regard for her.
The extreme escalation of that self-centered hedonism that we saw in Eric back when he met Peggy is the kind of self-centered hedonism that can make a murderer.
Eric's sentence is a mixed blessing.
Certainly there was that feeling of relief and being ecstatic, but there's also this devastating feeling, that makes it so final and so real.
I believe that based on his sentence, he's likely to die in prison.
I know my son, and he's not capable of doing a crime like that. He's not that type of person.
It definitely goes through your mind, what happened out there. Only one of them is here to tell the story.
Although Eric's conviction is justice to some, Peggy's body remains in its watery grave.
She's not coming back. I don't have a best friend. Peggy's mom doesn't have her daughter. And so it's sad.
The vast expanse of the South Pacific Ocean harbors thousands of islands, many of which exist in the collective imagination as idyllic sanctuaries, far removed from the grinding machinery and the often violent realities of the modern, continental world. American Samoa, a small, unincorporated territory of the United States, is one such place. Nestled deep in the heart of Polynesia, it is an archipelago characterized by its rugged volcanic peaks, dense tropical rainforests, and a deep-rooted, traditional way of life known as Fa Samoa. In a community numbering only in the tens of thousands, the concept of anonymity is virtually non-existent. It is a society woven tightly together by intricate webs of extended families, shared histories, and profound mutual reliance. Here, in the capital of Pago Pago, set against one of the deepest and most visually stunning natural harbors in the world. The rhythm of daily life is dictated not by the frenetic pace of a metropolis, but by the steady pull of the tides and the enduring bond of kinship. In such a deeply interconnected and geographically isolated environment, the illusion of absolute safety is not merely a comforting thought. It is a foundational pillar of the community's psyche. Crime, when it occurs, is typically minor, personal, and easily understood within the context of local disputes or youthful indiscretions. The residents of Tutuila, the main island, carry with them a steadfast belief that the true horrors of the world, the kind of sudden, incomprehensible brutality that dominates evening news broadcasts, are phenomena confined to distant shores, to the sprawling urban landscapes of the American mainland or other far-off nations. The psychological boundary between the peaceful shores of American Samoa and the violent unpredictability of the outside world is perceived to be as wide and as deep as the ocean that surrounds them. However, history invariably demonstrates that no geographical barrier is impenetrable, and no community, regardless of its size or its devotion to tradition, is entirely immune to the darker capacities of human nature. The fragility of this perceived sanctuary was violently exposed on a date that would permanently scar the historical record of the territory. Late in the evening of February 24, 2006, the profound tranquility of Pago Pago was shattered by an act of violence so extreme and so unprecedented that it fundamentally altered the way the community viewed its own safety and the sanctity of its institutions. This was not a random altercation born of momentary anger, nor was it a tragedy stemming from the natural elements that constantly surround the island. It was a targeted, brutal, and fatal assault on a figure who embodied the very concepts of order, justice, and the rule of law. The victim was Judge Park Chung-kyu, a highly respected and authoritative presence within the Administrative Court of American Samoa. Judge Park was not merely a functionary of the state. He was a prominent, distinguished, and highly visible member of the local Korean community, representing a bridge between different cultures within the small island demographic. His position demanded respect, and his life was deeply embedded in the civic and social fabric of the territory. The judicial system, particularly in a small jurisdiction, relies heavily on an unspoken, foundational covenant, those who sit in judgment, who navigate the complex and often contentious disputes of the community, must be afforded a mantle of absolute protection. The idea that a sitting judge could be targeted for murder was a concept so foreign to the residents of American Samoa that it defied immediate comprehension. It was a transgression that crossed an invisible but fiercely guarded line, signaling a breakdown of the deepest societal norms. The setting for this unprecedented act of violence stood in stark contrast to the gravity of the crime. The incident did not unfold in the quiet, imposing halls of a courthouse, nor in the secluded privacy of a residential neighborhood. Instead, the final moments of Judge Park's life played out in the mundane, dimly lit confines of a parking lot situated behind Trans nightclub. At the time, Trans was a well-known and relatively popular entertainment venue in Pago Pago, a place associated with leisure, music, and socializing. The area behind the establishment, like most parking lots at night, was a transitional space, a quiet zone separating the vibrant energy of the club from the stillness of the sleeping island. It was within this shadowed, liminal space that a horrific and irreversible sequence of events was set into motion. As Judge Park made his way across the asphalt toward his parked vehicle, likely anticipating the short journey home after an evening out, the illusion of the island's impenetrable safety was violently dismantled. The attack was characterized by an element of total surprise and an overwhelming, immediate application of lethal force. There was no forewarning, no escalating argument that might have drawn the attention of bystanders or offered an opportunity for intervention. Out of the darkness, an assailant struck with a terrifying, singular purpose. The weapon chosen for this execution was a long blade, an instrument designed for deep, penetrating trauma. The assailant did not strike once, they delivered multiple, forceful thrusts targeting the most vital areas of the judge's body. The physical reality of the assault was defined by a ruthless efficiency, a clear and undeniable intent to inflict maximum damage and to ensure that the victim would not survive the encounter. This was a profoundly visceral and intimate form of violence, requiring the attacker to close the distance, to physically overpower the victim, and to engage in a deeply personal act of destruction. The silence of the night was ruptured by the brutal reality of the attack, leaving a pillar of the community fatally wounded on the cold pavement. The suddenness of the ambush, combined with the sheer ferocity of the knife strikes, left Judge Park with no viable means of defense or escape. The incident was over in a matter of moments, but the shockwaves it generated would reverberate through the island for years to come. The news of the murder spread through the tight-knit villages of American Samoa not with the slow, measured pace of official announcements, but with the rapid, electric urgency of a crisis. As dawn broke over the harbor, the island awoke to a reality that was fundamentally changed. The initial reaction was one of profound disbelief, a collective struggle to process information that seemed fundamentally incompatible with their understanding of their own home. How could a judge, a symbol of authority and conflict resolution, be slaughtered in a nightclub parking lot? The questions multiplied rapidly, fueling a growing sense of unease and vulnerability. The horror of the event was compounded by the stark realization that the perpetrator was not a faceless outsider who had slipped onto the island under the cover of darkness, but someone who moved within their own community. The violence had not been imported. It had incubated right there, beneath the surface of their peaceful society. This realization tore at the fabric of trust that bound the residents together. If a highly respected judge, a man who possessed authority and standing, could be ambushed and murdered with such savage intensity, then the unspoken covenant of safety that everyone relied upon was fundamentally broken. The murder of Judge Park Chung-kyu was not merely the tragic loss of a life. It was an assault on the psychological foundation of American Samoa. It introduced a chilling new paradigm to the territory, forcing its people to confront the terrifying reality that the darkest impulses of humanity could manifest themselves even in the most seemingly idyllic of places, and that the protective embrace of the ocean was not enough to keep the shadows at bay. To understand the profound tragedy of what occurred in the shadowed parking lot of Trans nightclub, one must first understand the man whose life was so violently extinguished, and the immense weight of the position he held within the territory. Judge Park Chung-kyu was not an ordinary citizen, and his death was not an ordinary crime. In the intricate, closely knit societal structure of American Samoa, a judge is far more than a mere interpreter of the law. They are the ultimate arbiters of order, the physical embodiment of the social contract that binds a diverse and complex community together. The administrative court, where Judge Park presided, is a critical venue. It is the arena where the machinery of government intersects with the lives of the people, where regulations are enforced, where administrative disputes are settled, and where the delicate balance between state authority and individual rights is constantly weighed and maintained. To sit on the bench of such a court requires not only a profound understanding of legal statutes, but also an unwavering commitment to fairness, an unyielding moral compass, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the community one serves. Judge Park possessed these qualities in abundance, earning him a reputation as a jurist of exceptional integrity and unassailable authority. He was a man who navigated the complexities of administrative law with a steady hand and a clear mind, ensuring that the wheels of territorial governance turned smoothly and justly. The administrative court in a territory like American Samoa deals with the very lifeblood of the island's infrastructure. It is the place where the complexities of territorial governance are ironed out, where the rules governing commerce, immigration, and public services are contested and clarified. A judge in this position holds the keys to the daily functionality of the government. They must be immune to corruption, resistant to political pressure, and deeply empathetic to the needs of the citizens who appear before them. Judge Park bore this immense responsibility with a quiet dignity. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail, his exhaustive review of case files, and his unwavering commitment to rendering decisions that were legally sound and morally just. His courtroom was a place of decorum and respect, a sanctuary where the law was revered and applied with a steady, impartial hand. The very idea that violence could touch a man whose life was so deeply intertwined with the peaceful resolution of conflict was a concept that simply did not exist in the local lexicon. Until that fateful night, beyond his esteemed role within the judicial system, Judge Park Chung-kyu occupied another, equally vital position within the cultural tapestry of American Samoa. He was a prominent, highly visible, and deeply respected leader within the local Korean community. The demographic landscape of the island territory is layered, with various expatriate and immigrant communities contributing to the economic and social vitality of the region. The Korean community, though a minority population compared to the indigenous Samoan majority, has long been an integral part of the territory's fabric, bringing with them a rich heritage, a strong work ethic, and deeply ingrained traditions. Navigating life as a minority in a small, traditional island society requires a delicate balance of preserving one's own cultural identity while simultaneously assimilating into and respecting the dominant local customs. Known as the Fa Samoa, Judge Park was the living embodiment of this successful synthesis. He stood as a pillar of strength and a beacon of guidance for his fellow Koreans, a figure they could look up to with immense pride. His presence on the judicial bench was a powerful symbol of integration and achievement, demonstrating that the Korean community was not merely residing on the island, but actively contributing to its highest institutions. He was a man who bridged two distinct worlds, facilitating understanding and fostering mutual respect between different cultural groups. His influence extended far beyond the courtroom, touching the lives of countless individuals who sought his counsel, his leadership, and his steady, reassuring presence in their daily lives. The story of the Korean diaspora in the South Pacific is one of resilience, adaptation, and quiet perseverance. Arriving in a land with vastly different customs, a different language, and a different climate, these immigrants had to forge a new identity while holding onto the core values of their homeland. Within this narrative of adaptation, Judge Park emerged as a towering figure of success. He represented the ultimate realization of the immigrant dream, not only surviving in a new land but rising to one of its highest and most respected positions. For young Koreans growing up in American Samoa, he was a living testament to what could be achieved through education, hard work, and an unyielding commitment to excellence. When he spoke, people listened. When he offered advice, it was taken to heart. His sudden and violent removal from this position of leadership left a gaping wound in the community, a profound sense of loss that went far beyond the professional realm. They lost a mentor, an advocate, and a shining example of their collective potential. When a man of such stature is struck down, the impact is not confined to his immediate circle. It ripples outward, shaking the very foundations of the society he served. The murder of a sitting judge is a terrifying anomaly, an event so rare and so profoundly transgressive that it defies the established parameters of societal behavior. In the entire history of American Samoa, the assassination of a high-ranking judicial official was an unprecedented nightmare. It was a scenario that law enforcement, political leaders, and the general public simply had not considered a realistic possibility within their borders. The judicial system is built upon an implicit guarantee of safety for those who administer the law. Judges must be free to make difficult, sometimes unpopular decisions without the paralyzing fear of violent retribution. They are the protected guardians of a civilized society. Therefore, the brutal attack on Judge Park was not just an act of violence against a single human being. It was a direct, calculated assault on the institution of justice itself. It was a stark declaration that the protective aura surrounding the territory's most respected figures had been shattered. The psychological shockwave that followed this realization was immediate and devastating. It plunged the entire political and security apparatus of American Samoa into a state of profound crisis, forcing them to confront a terrifying new reality where the lines of safety had been violently redrawn. The concept of the unprecedented is often overused, but in the case of Judge Park's murder, it is the only accurate description. Societies build their daily routines around a set of invisible, assumed protections. We assume that certain people, by virtue of their office and the respect they command, are inherently safe from random, brutal violence. In a small island territory where familial ties interlock and community surveillance is naturally high, this assumption of safety is magnified. Everyone knows everyone, and the social cost of violent crime is impossibly steep. Therefore, when an attacker deliberately targets a figure of such high standing, they are not just breaking the law. They are actively declaring war on the foundational principles of the community. They are sending a terrifying message that no one, absolutely no one, is safe. This was the dark, chilling realization that crept into the minds of the residents of Pago Pago in the hours and days following the murder. The psychological toll of this realization was immeasurable, breeding a quiet paranoia that seeped into the very soil of the island, forever altering the way people looked at their neighbors and the shadowed corners of their usually peaceful towns. The dissonance between Judge Park's distinguished life and the sordid nature of his death adds a layer of profound tragedy to the narrative. Here was a man who spent his days in the sterile, brightly lit, and highly structured environment of a courtroom, surrounded by the solemn rituals of the law. His professional life was defined by reason, evidence, procedure, and the pursuit of truth. Yet, his final moments were consumed by the exact opposite: chaos, darkness, irrationality, and raw, unfiltered brutality. The parking lot behind Trans nightclub, a place meant for the transient passage of revelers seeking an evening of escape, became the stage for a grim and permanent silencing. It is this stark juxtaposition that makes the story of Judge Park Chung-kyu so incredibly difficult to process. The community had to reconcile the image of the dignified jurist in his judicial robes with the horrific reality of a man bleeding out on the cold asphalt under the indifferent glow of streetlights. This brutal contrast highlighted the inherent vulnerability of even the most powerful individuals when confronted by sudden, determined malice. The realization that a lifetime of honorable service, of building bridges and upholding the law, could be erased in a matter of seconds by the thrust of a blade left an indelible scar on the collective conscience of the island. The immediate aftermath of the realization of who the victim was sent the territory's leadership into a frantic reevaluation of everything they thought they knew about their homeland. The political stability of a small territory relies heavily on the perceived safety and authority of its leaders. When Judge Park was identified as the victim of this savage attack, a profound sense of vulnerability washed over every official in Pago Pago. The police force, accustomed to dealing with a relatively manageable scale of local disputes, suddenly found themselves staring into the abyss of a high-profile assassination. The security protocols that had been considered adequate for decades were instantly exposed as woefully insufficient. The death of Judge Park served as a grim and terrifying wake-up call, a bloody testament to the fact that the territory was not immune to the kind of targeted, high-stakes violence that plagues larger, more volatile societies. The shock of his murder paralyzed the community, not just with grief for the loss of a good and respected man, but with a deep, existential dread about what this act meant for their future. It forced a painful loss of innocence, a harsh realization that the idyllic isolation of the South Pacific could not protect them from the darkest shadows of the human condition. As we prepare to delve into the harrowing specifics of that fateful night and the relentless investigation that followed, it is absolutely crucial to keep the image of Judge Park Chung-kyu at the forefront of our minds. We must remember him not merely as a victim, not just as a name attached to a tragic headline, but as a fully realized human being who contributed immensely to the world around him. He was a man who dedicated his intellect and his energy to the betterment of American Samoa. He was a beacon of hope and a source of immense pride for the Korean community. He was a symbol of justice, fairness, and the enduring power of the rule of law. The profound tragedy of his story lies not just in the sheer brutality of his end, but in the immense void his absence created. By understanding the depth of his character, the significance of his position, and the respect he commanded, we can begin to truly comprehend the magnitude of the crime that was committed on February 24, 2006. His death was a theft of violent stealing of a life that held immense value, leaving behind a shattered community that would spend years trying to rebuild the sense of security and trust that was destroyed in that dark, unforgiving parking lot. The story of Judge Park Chung-kyu is a sobering reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating impact that a single act of profound malice can have on an entire society. The date was February 24, 2006, a Friday evening that gradually transitioned into the late, shadowed hours of the night. In the tropical environment of American Samoa, the nights carry a distinct atmosphere. The oppressive heat of the day often gives way to a heavy, humid stillness, broken only by the distant, rhythmic sound of the Pacific Ocean meeting the volcanic shores. The island of Tutuila, for all its daytime vibrancy, tends to quiet down significantly as midnight approaches. The bustling activities of commerce and government recede, leaving the streets largely empty and the villages wrapped in darkness. It is an environment that naturally fosters a sense of isolation, but for the residents who have spent their lives within this deeply familiar landscape, that isolation is equated with peace and absolute security. The darkness is not perceived as a cloak for malice, but simply as a natural pause in the rhythm of island life. However, on this specific night, that pervasive sense of security was about to be irrevocably shattered in the most brutal manner imaginable. The timeline of this tragedy narrows down to the late night hours, a period when the boundaries between public celebration and private solitude become starkly defined. The epicenter of this impending violence was the area immediately surrounding Trans nightclub, located in the capital of Pago Pago. At that time, Trans was a familiar fixture in the local social scene, a popular entertainment venue where people gathered to drink, socialize, and unwind after the completion of the work week. Inside the establishment, the atmosphere would have been characterized by the sensory overload typical of such venues: loud music, the murmur of countless overlapping conversations, the clinking of glassware, and the dim, colorful lighting designed to create an environment of escapism. It was a space of collective energy and shared distraction. But the geography of a nightclub always includes its immediate exterior, the transitional spaces that bridge the loud, chaotic interior with the quiet reality of the outside world. The parking lot situated directly behind Trans nightclub served exactly this purpose. It was a utilitarian space, a stretch of asphalt designated for the temporary storage of vehicles, devoid of the security or the vibrant life found just on the other side of the club's walls. Parking lots at night, particularly those tucked behind commercial buildings, possess a unique and often unsettling liminality. They are poorly lit, filled with the visual obstructions of parked cars, and entirely isolated from the protective gaze of the public. When an individual steps out of a crowded venue and into the darkened expanse of a rear parking lot, they experience a sudden and dramatic shift in their environment. The noise of the crowd is replaced by an eerie silence, and the safety of numbers is instantly replaced by solitary vulnerability. It was into this specific, shadowed environment that Judge Park Chung-kyu walked on the late night of February 24th. He was undertaking an action so profoundly mundane that it is performed by millions of people every single night without a second thought. He was simply walking to his parked car. He was navigating the brief, unremarkable journey between the end of an evening out and the beginning of his drive home. Given the deeply ingrained perception of safety in American Samoa, it is a certainty that Judge Park was entirely unburdened by any apprehension as he crossed the asphalt. He was a man of high standing, moving through his own community, in a territory where the murder of a public official was an unthinkable concept. There would have been no reason for him to constantly skim the shadows, no instinct to check his periphery for a lurking threat. His mind was likely occupied with the events of the evening, the legal complexities of his upcoming docket, or simply the anticipation of returning to the comfort of his own home. This psychological state of complete ease is a crucial element in understanding the terrifying nature of what occurred next. The attacker relied entirely on this vulnerability. The subsequent violence was not preceded by a warning, a shouted threat, or an escalating physical altercation that might have afforded the judge a fleeting moment to brace himself or to attempt an escape. The assault was initiated with an element of total, paralyzing surprise. Out of the darkness of the parking lot, an assailant closed the distance between them with terrifying speed and absolute silence. The disruption of the peaceful night was instantaneous. One moment, Judge Park was a solitary figure walking toward his vehicle. The next, he was fighting for his life against an overwhelming, unseen force. The weapon chosen for this attack speaks volumes about the predetermined nature of the violence. The attacker did not use bare hands, a blunt object found at the scene, or a small pocket knife. According to the subsequent medical and investigative reports, the assailant wielded a long knife. A blade of this description is not a tool designed for intimidation or casual injury. It is an instrument specifically designed to inflict catastrophic, deep tissue trauma. The presence of such a weapon indicates a clear, premeditated intention to execute a lethal strike. When the attacker descended upon Judge Park, the violence was explosive and uncontained. The forensic reality of the crime scene and the subsequent autopsy revealed a narrative of sheer, unadulterated brutality. The assailant did not strike indiscriminately. The attack was intensely focused on the most vulnerable and vital regions of the human anatomy. The long knife was driven repeatedly into the judge's chest and abdomen. This deliberate targeting is the hallmark of an attacker whose sole objective is the immediate eradication of life. The human chest cavity houses the heart and the major blood vessels, while the abdomen contains a dense network of highly vascularized internal organs. To plunge a long blade into these specific areas is to initiate a catastrophic failure of the body's most critical systems. The physical mechanics of such an attack are horrifying to contemplate. A stabbing with a long knife requires significant physical force. It is an intimately violent act, requiring the attacker to stand well within the personal space of the victim, to physically overpower them, and to forcefully drive the weapon through layers of clothing, muscle, and bone. The fact that Judge Park suffered multiple stab wounds indicates a relentless and sustained assault. The attacker did not simply inflict a single wound and flee in panic. They maintained their proximity, repeatedly withdrawing the blade and driving it back into the victim's flesh. This repetition highlights a terrifying level of determination and a profound depth of malice. Each successive strike was a deliberate reinforcement of the intent to kill, a refusal to cease the violence until the ultimate outcome was absolutely guaranteed. In the sudden chaos of the ambush, Judge Park would have been utterly defenseless. The sheer suddenness of the attack, combined with the immediate and agonizing pain of the initial wounds, would have triggered a state of massive physiological shock. There was no opportunity to employ defensive tactics, no chance to disarm the assailant, and no possibility of outrunning a threat that was already upon him. He was trapped in the shadowed confines of the parking lot, subjected to a barrage of lethal force that he could neither anticipate nor repel. The brutality of the assault was absolute, leaving the distinguished jurist physically dismantled on the cold, unforgiving surface of the asphalt. Among the multiple, devastating wounds inflicted during this rapid sequence of violence, there was a fatal blow that definitively sealed the judge's fate. The autopsy reports confirmed that one or more of the deep thrusts into his torso severed critical vascular structures. When major arteries or the heart itself are compromised by a deep, penetrating laceration, the physiological response is immediate and catastrophic. The body experiences acute blood loss, a condition known medically as rapid exsanguination. The circulatory system, designed to maintain a pressurized flow of oxygenated blood to the brain and other vital organs, instantly loses its integrity. As a massive volume of blood escapes the vascular system and floods the internal cavities or spills onto the ground, blood pressure plummets to critical levels in a matter of seconds. The human body cannot sustain this level of acute trauma. The brain, suddenly deprived of oxygen and blood pressure, ceases to function. The mechanical reality of this specific type of wound dictates that the victim does not linger, does not slowly fade away, and cannot physically remain upright. The sudden, catastrophic loss of blood volume caused Judge Park to collapse instantly. His legs would have given way beneath him, unable to support his weight as his nervous system shut down in the face of overwhelming systemic failure. The man who, only moments before, had been a pillar of the community, a respected voice of authority, and a father figure to many, was abruptly reduced to a fallen, lifeless form upon the ground. He slumped to the pavement of the Trans nightclub parking lot, his life forcefully and violently extinguished in the span of a few terrifying heartbeats. The attacker, having achieved their grim objective, withdrew from the immediate vicinity, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. The frenetic, kinetic energy of the brutal assault instantly dissipated, replaced by a profound and heavy silence. The loud music from the nightclub likely continued to play, muffled by the exterior walls, entirely disconnected from the horrific reality that had just unfolded mere yards away. The darkness of the parking lot reclaimed its territory, now masking the aftermath of a murder that would soon shatter the foundations of the territory. Judge Park Shinki lay motionless on the asphalt, his life's blood staining the ground. He had survived the rigors of immigration, the challenges of ascending to the upper echelons of the judicial system, and the complexities of navigating a unique island culture, only to be struck down by an unseen hand in the most mundane of settings. The sheer kick of the attack, the element of surprise, the terrifying weapon, the multiple strikes to the chest and abdomen, and the instantaneous, catastrophic collapse stood in jarring, deeply disturbing contrast to the dignified life he had led. The incident was not merely a physical attack. It was a violent tearing of the social fabric. It was an act of savagery that transformed a quiet Friday night into the darkest chapter in the modern history of American Samoa, leaving a chilling void where a respected leader once stood, and setting the stage for an investigation that would consume the island in the days to come. The immediate aftermath of the violence in the parking lot behind Trans nightclub was characterized by a chaotic intersection of discovery and profound disbelief. When the first calls for emergency assistance echoed through the dispatch center of the local police department in Pago Pago, they conveyed the frantic, disjointed panic of bystanders who had stumbled upon a nightmare. The transition from the thumping bass and neon lights of a Friday night to the harsh, unforgiving glare of police cruisers pulling into the darkened asphalt was jarring. As the first responding officers arrived on the scene, they were met with a grim reality that immediately elevated the situation from a standard late-night disturbance to a crisis of unparalleled magnitude. They found a man critically wounded, lying in a rapidly expanding pool of his own blood. The initial moments of securing any crime scene are always fraught with tension. A desperate race to preserve the integrity of the area while simultaneously attempting to administer whatever life-saving measures might still be possible. However, given the catastrophic nature of the wounds inflicted by the long knife, it quickly became tragically apparent that medical intervention would be futile. The primary objective shifted swiftly and grimly from rescue to the meticulous documentation of a homicide. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the grim tableau, casting long, erotic shadows across the faces of the gathering crowd of onlookers who had spilled out from the nightclub. Their expressions morphing from alcohol-fueled revelry to sheer, unadulterated horror. The true weight of the situation descended upon the investigative team the moment the victim was positively identified. In a jurisdiction like American Samoa, where law enforcement officers intimately know the community they serve, recognizing the face of Judge Park Chung-kyu on the blood-stained pavement must have felt like a physical blow. The sudden realization that the territory's highest echelons of justice had been breached and violently assaulted sent immediate shockwaves through the chain of command. This was not a gang-related skirmish or a domestic dispute that had tragically escalated out of control. This was the deliberate slaughter of a sitting judge, a figure of authority, stability, and immense public respect. The pressure placed upon the local police force in that exact moment was immeasurable. They were suddenly thrust onto a stage they had never anticipated occupying, tasked with solving a crime that threatened to destabilize the very foundation of the island's social order. The investigation had to be flawless. Every piece of evidence, every photograph taken, every measurement recorded had to be executed with a precision that left no room for error or defense attorney exploitation. The island territory, unaccustomed to the intense scrutiny of a high-profile political assassination, suddenly had to mobilize its resources to conduct an investigation that would inevitably be scrutinized by the highest levels of government both locally and, potentially, on the federal mainland. As detectives began the arduous process of processing the crime scene, their first critical task was to interpret the narrative left behind by the physical evidence and determine the underlying motive for the savagery. In many late-night parking lot homicides, the most immediate and statistically probable assumption is a robbery gone wrong. An opportunistic predator spots a solitary figure, a struggle ensues over a wallet or a watch, and lethal force is applied in a moment of panic. However, the seasoned investigators analyzing the scene behind Tran's nightclub quickly and decisively ruled out this theory. The ferocity of the attack simply did not align with the mechanics of a common mugging. A robber seeks compliance and quick acquisition of valuables. They do not typically unleash a barrage of deep, penetrating knife thrusts into the chest and abdomen of a compliant or defenseless target unless the destruction of the victim is the primary goal. Furthermore, the undisturbed nature of the victim's personal effects pointed definitively away from financial gain. This was an execution, plain and simple. The violence was targeted, sustained, and deeply personal. It spoke of a profound rage, a hatred that had calcified into a deadly resolve. By eliminating the motive of a random robbery, the detectives were forced to look inward, to peer into the complex web of relationships and professional interactions that defined Judge Park's life. Searching for a grievance dark enough to warrant such an extreme response. The breakthrough in the investigation did not come from a miraculous piece of microscopic forensic evidence, but rather from the unique sociological fabric of American Samoa itself. In a territory defined by the traditional Samoan way of life, secrecy is an incredibly difficult commodity to maintain. It is a culture built upon deep familial interconnectedness, communal living, and a robust oral tradition where news and observations travel with astonishing speed. The protective anonymity that a killer might rely upon in a sprawling, indifferent metropolis simply does not exist on the island of Tutuila. Someone always sees something, and someone always knows something. The parking lot of a popular nightclub, even in its darker corners, is rarely devoid of wandering eyes. As the initial shock wore off and the gravity of the judge's murder settled over the community, the deeply ingrained sense of civic duty and the collective outrage over the violation of their peaceful sanctuary began to override the natural fear of stepping forward. Witnesses who had been in the vicinity of the nightclub that evening began to speak with law enforcement. They provided fragments of observation, a figure moving hurriedly through the shadows, a fleeting glimpse of a face, a description of physical stature and clothing, and the chaotic sounds of the brief, fatal struggle. Piece by piece, these witness accounts were corroborated and synthesized by the investigative team, weaving a net that steadily tightened around a specific individual. The name that emerged from the whispers and the official statements was Taya Fatupaya, commonly known within the community as Junior. The identification of a suspect is always a pivotal moment in any homicide investigation. But the emergence of his name shifted the trajectory of the case from a terrifying mystery to a focused pursuit. Detectives cross-referenced the physical descriptions provided by the brave witnesses with his known profile. They began to retrace his movements on the night of February 24th, looking for the crucial intersections between his timeline and the tragic final moments of Judge Park. In a small island community, tracking an individual's movements is heavily reliant on interpersonal inquiries, asking questions at local establishments, and connecting the dots provided by a highly observant populace. The physical evidence recovered from the scene, combined with the increasingly solid wall of witness testimonies, began to form an undeniable link between Tayo Jr. Fatupaya and the brutal act of violence committed in the nightclub parking lot. With a prime suspect firmly in their sights, the investigators delved into the most crucial question of all regarding the motive. If this was not a random robbery, and if the brutality indicated a deeply personal animosity, what could have driven a man to slaughter a highly respected judge? The detectives began to meticulously peel back the layers of the suspect's life, examining his history, his associations, and any potential intersections with the administrative court or Judge Park himself. What they uncovered was a narrative of simmering resentment, a long-standing personal conflict that had festered in the shadows, while the rest of the island went about its peaceful existence. The exact nature of this grievance, the specific details of the perceived slight or legal dispute that ignited such a profound hatred, became the focal point of the prosecution's building case. It highlighted a terrifying reality that the machinery of justice, even when operated by a man of unimpeachable integrity, can generate deeply personal enemies. Decisions made from the bench, administrative rulings that affect livelihoods or personal standing, can sometimes trigger a pathological obsession in the minds of those who feel wronged. For the attacker, whatever this long-standing issue entailed, it had mutated from a manageable grievance into a toxic, all-consuming rationale for murder. The culmination of this rapid, intense, and heavily scrutinized investigation was the swift apprehension of Tayo Jr. Fatupaya. Armed with the corroborating statements of multiple witnesses, the logical deduction that eliminated alternative motives, and the physical evidence tying the suspect to the location of the crime, law enforcement moved decisively. The arrest was not a prolonged, dramatic standoff, but rather the inevitable conclusion of an investigation that had efficiently leveraged the close-knit nature of the island community against the perpetrator. He was taken into custody shortly after the murder, a testament to the speed at which the local police force adapted to the unprecedented crisis. The doors of the territorial jail closed behind him, securing the man accused of shattering the peace of American Samoa. However, the arrest was merely the closing of the first chapter in this tragedy. As the initial panic subsided and the reality of the situation solidified, the territory braced itself for the arduous legal battle that lay ahead. The upcoming trial would not just be about proving the guilt of one man. It would be a stress test for the entire judicial system that Judge Park had so faithfully served. The community, still reeling from the loss of a beloved leader, looked toward the courts, demanding that the scales of justice, which had been so violently disrupted, be rebalanced with an unyielding and absolute severity. The transition from the investigative phase to the formal legal proceedings marked a significant and somber era for the territory of American Samoa. By the time the calendar turned to 2007, the initial shock of the murder had evolved into a stele. Collective determination to see justice served within the very system that Judge Park Chung-Kyu had spent his life defending. The trial of Taya Jr. Fatupayo was not merely a criminal proceeding. It was a profound psychological necessity for a community that felt its foundational safety had been violated. The setting for this legal reckoning was the High Court in Pago Pago, a building that stands as a symbol of colonial and local history, where the rituals of American law meet the ancient traditions of the islands. For many who entered those hallowed halls during the trial, the irony was inescapable. The halls that usually echoed with the measured, intellectual debates of administrative law were now the venue for a detailed autopsy of a savage, primitive act of violence. The atmosphere inside the courtroom was heavy, thick with the humidity of the tropics and the palpable tension of a society waiting for an answer to an unthinkable crime. The legal strategy employed by the prosecution was built upon a foundation of meticulous preparation and a refusal to let the gravity of the victim's status overshadow the cold, hard facts of the case. They understood that to secure a conviction for murder in the first degree, they had to go beyond proving that Fatupayo was the one who held the knife. They had to demonstrate a level of premeditation and a specific, lethal intent that aligned with the highest level of criminal culpability. This meant reconstructing the night of February 24th with clinical precision. They began by calling to the stand the first responders and the medical professionals who had attended the scene. These witnesses provided the visceral, undeniable reality of the crime. They described the scene behind Tran's nightclub not as a place of entertainment, but as a site of catastrophic trauma. The descriptions of the wounds were particularly grueling for the family and colleagues of the judge who sat in the gallery. The prosecution emphasized the choice of the weapon, a long, formidable blade, arguing that such a tool was not carried for protection or utility, but was selected specifically for its capacity to end a life quickly and efficiently. As the physical evidence was presented, the long knife itself became a silent, terrifying witness in the courtroom. When it was entered into evidence, a hush fell over the room. The prosecution used the weapon to illustrate the mechanics of the attack, showing how the length and sharpness of the blade allowed for the deep, penetrating thrusts into the chest and abdomen that the medical examiner had detailed. They argued that the sheer number of stabs was the ultimate proof of the defendant's state of mind. Each subsequent wound was a fresh decision to kill, a deliberate act of violence that occurred after the initial shock of the ambush. This was not a heat-of-passion crime, they contended, but a calculated execution. The witnesses who had seen a figure lingering in the shadows of the parking lot were brought forward to testify, their accounts providing the jury with a timeline that suggested Fatupayo had been waiting, watching, and biding his time until Judge Park was at his most vulnerable. The image of the stalker in the darkness was a powerful and haunting theme that the prosecution returned to throughout the trial. The most critical and perhaps the most complex part of the trial involved the exploration of the motive. In American Samoa, where personal histories are intertwined and grievances can span generations, the why of a crime is often as important as the who. The prosecution delved deep into the history of the personal conflict between Taya Fatupayo and Judge Park. They presented a narrative of a long-standing, festering resentment that had been allowed to warp into a murderous obsession. This conflict was described not as a singular event, but as a series of perceived slights and legal frustrations that the defendant had focused entirely on the person of the judge. By presenting this history, the prosecution was able to show the jury a clear path from grievance to rage, and finally to the premeditated decision to take a life. They argued that Fatupaya had identified the judge as the source of his troubles and had decided that the only way to resolve his internal turmoil was through an act of ultimate destruction. This focus on the personal nature of the crime served to make the defendant's actions seem even more calculated and dangerous to the social order. The defense, for its part, was faced with the nearly impossible task of countering a mountain of corroborating evidence and the overwhelming weight of public sentiment. Their strategy was largely one of mitigation and the creation of reasonable doubt, however slim. They questioned the reliability of the eyewitnesses, pointing out the darkness of the parking lot and the inherent fallibility of human memory under stress. They attempted to find inconsistencies in the police reports and the forensic chain of custody, searching for any procedural error that could be used to cast suspicion on the integrity of the investigation. However, the defense struggled to provide an alternative narrative that could account for the weapon, the motive, and the presence of the defendant at the scene. There was no evidence of a third party, no plausible theory of self-defense, and no credible alibi that could withstand the scrutiny of the prosecution's timeline. The defendant's own demeanor throughout the trial offered little help to his cause. He remained largely stoic, showing a lack of remorse that many observers found deeply unsettling and consistent with the prosecution's portrait of a cold-blooded killer. The presence of the Korean community in the courtroom added a layer of profound cultural significance to the proceedings. For them, Judge Park was more than a public official. He was a pioneer, a protector, and a source of immense collective pride. His murder was seen as a targeted strike against their sense of belonging and safety on the island. Their silent, dignified presence in the gallery served as a constant reminder to the jury of the human cost of the crime. The tension between the indigenous Samoan population and the expatriate communities, while usually managed through the Fa Samoa and mutual respect, was put under immense strain by this trial. The judicial system had to prove that it could provide equal justice regardless of the background of the victim or the perpetrator. This pressure was felt by everyone in the room, from the bailiffs to the presiding judge, making the trial one of the most scrutinized and high-stakes events in the modern history of the territory. As the trial reached its conclusion, the closing arguments of the prosecution were a powerful summation of a life lost and a peace shattered. They spoke of Judge Park not just as a name on a case file, but as a man of integrity whose final moments were filled with an undeserved terror. They reminded the jury that the laws of American Samoa were designed to protect everyone, and that the brutal silencing of a judge was an attack on the very concept of those laws. They called for a verdict that reflected the premeditated, savage nature of the act. The defense, in its final plea, urged the jury to look past the emotion of the case and to consider the high bar of proof required for a first-degree murder conviction. They asked for a moment of doubt, a consideration of the defendant's humanity, and a rejection of the narrative of pure, unadulterated malice. But the evidence was too cohesive, the witnesses too consistent, and the motive too clear. The period of jury deliberation was a time of suspended animation for the island. In Pago Pago, the usual chatter at the markets and in the villages was replaced by a quiet, expectant waiting. Everyone knew that the verdict would be a turning point. When the news finally came that a decision had been reached, the courthouse was surrounded by people, many of whom had traveled from the furthest villages of Tutuila to hear the outcome. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of anxiety and a desperate hope for closure. When the jury filed back into the room, their faces were solemn, reflecting the weight of the decision they had been asked to make. The clerk of the court took the paper, and the words that followed were the culmination of over a year of grief and investigation. Taya Jr. Fatupaya was found guilty of murder in the first degree. The conviction was met with a heavy, profound silence in the courtroom, followed by the audible sobs of the judge's family. For the prosecution and the police, it was a moment of hard-won professional validation. But for the community, it was the beginning of the end of a long nightmare. However, the legal process was not yet complete. The sentencing phase followed, and it was here that the territory's judicial system would deliver its final, most forceful message. In 2007, the court handed down the sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This was the maximum penalty allowed, a sentence that ensured the defendant would spend the remainder of his natural life behind bars, removed from the society he had so violently disrupted. The judge who delivered the sentence spoke of the necessity of protecting the institutions of justice and the absolute intolerance for the type of targeted brutality that Fatupaya had displayed. The sentencing of Taya Jr. Fatupaya brought the formal legal chapter of the Park Chung-kyu murder to a close, but the echoes of the verdict resonated far beyond the walls of the High Court. The finality of life without parole provided a sense of security to the other members of the judiciary and the Korean community, a signal that the law would not flinch in the face of such an extreme transgression. The man who had walked into the darkness of a parking lot with a long knife and a heart full of resentment had been permanently silenced by the very system he sought to wound. The trial and its results stood as a grim testament to the fact that even in a small, remote territory in the South Pacific, the reach of justice is long and its resolve is unyielding. The scales, which had been so violently tipped on a February night in 2006, were finally, painfully brought back into balance. The echoes of the final gavel strike in the High Court of American Samoa did not merely signal the end of a trial, they marked the beginning of a long, contemplative silence that would descend over the territory of Tutuila for decades to come. When a community as small and as deeply interconnected as this one experiences a transgression of such magnitude, the resolution of the legal case is rarely the end of the story. Instead, the conviction and sentencing of Taya Jr. Fatupaya acted as a catalyst for a profound societal transformation. A period of collective introspection that forced every resident to reevaluate their assumptions about safety, tradition, and the fragile nature of justice in an isolated paradise. The immediate physical legacy of the murder of Judge Park Chung-kyu was found in the suddenly visible barriers that began to appear around the institutions of power in Pago Pago. Before that dark Friday in February 2006, the relationship between the government and the governed was defined by an almost radical accessibility. Judges, lawmakers, and high-ranking officials moved through the villages and the capital with a freedom that was a source of immense territorial pride. It was a testament to the belief that the law was not a distant, threatening force imposed from the mainland, but a neighborly institution woven into the fabric of the Samoa. The death of Judge Park ended that era of innocence forever, replacing it with a grim and necessary pragmatism. In the months and years following the sentencing, the courthouses and administrative buildings of American Samoa underwent a literal hardening. The open-door policy that had characterized the territory's judicial culture for generations was forcefully retracted. Security protocols that were once considered an American mainland eccentricity became a staple of daily life. Metal detectors, which had previously been viewed with a degree of skepticism or seen as mere formalities, were now operated with a new, somber intensity. The sight of armed security personnel patrolling the perimeters of judicial chambers became a permanent fixture of the landscape, a constant visual reminder of the violence that had necessitated their presence. For the colleagues and successors of Judge Park, the daily act of entering their places of work was no longer just a professional routine. It was an act that required passing through layers of protection that served as a silent eulogy for the man who had been left defenseless. This shift was not merely logistical. It was a psychological scarring of the public service. Every judge who took the bench from that point forward did so with the knowledge that the mantle of their office provided no inherent shield against the darkest impulses of human resentment. The loss of that perceived invulnerability fundamentally changed the way justice was administered, introducing a subtle, underlying tension into the halls of power that had never existed before the events at Trans nightclub. The Korean community, which had looked to Judge Park as its most shining example of integration and success, was forced to navigate a particularly complex and painful path toward healing. For them, the murder was not just a crime against a public official. It was a targeted strike against their collective identity and their sense of belonging in the South Pacific. The void left by Judge Park's absence was immeasurable. He had been the primary bridge between the expatriate community and the indigenous Samoan power structures, a man whose wisdom was sought in times of both personal and communal crisis. In the wake of his death, There was a period of profound mourning that transcended cultural boundaries, but there was also a new, sharp sense of vulnerability that lingered long after the funeral rites were completed. For many Korean families who had invested their lives and their futures in American Samoa, the parking lot behind the nightclub became a permanent dark spot in their geography, a symbol of the fragility of the immigrant dream. Yet, the community chose to respond not with a retreat into isolation, but with a renewed commitment to the island. They established scholarships and community programs in Judge Park's name, ensuring that his legacy was defined by the profound contributions he made to the law and to social harmony rather than the brutal manner of his exit. They worked to ensure that the memory of his integrity remained a guiding light for future generations of Koreans and Samoans alike, turning a narrative of victimhood into one of enduring resilience. However, the most difficult consequence of this tragedy was the unique sociological dilemma it created for the territory as a whole. In a land where family ties are the primary currency of social life, the aftermath of a murder involves more than just the victim and the perpetrator. It involves the collision of two lineages. American Samoa is a place where you cannot simply move away from a tragedy. The family of the victim and the family of the killer often continue to reside in the same villages, shop at the same markets, and attend the same churches. The traditional Samoan way of life, the Fa Samoa, provides a framework for reconciliation through ceremonies like the Ifoga, where a family seeks forgiveness for the crimes of one of its members. But the murder of a judge by a member of the community for a personal grievance was an act that stretched the limits of these ancient traditions. It created a deep, internal friction between the requirements of modern American law and the cultural expectations of communal harmony. The stigma of the crime hung over the village of the perpetrator like a heavy, unshakable cloud. While the family of Judge Park had to carry their grief in a public eye that was constantly watching for signs of how they would move forward. The process of healing was not a linear progression, but a slow, agonizing navigation of shared spaces and silent acknowledgments, a testament to the heavy burden of memory in a small place. As the years began to distance the community from the immediate trauma of 2006, the story of Judge Park Chung-kyu transitioned from a shocking headline into a foundational piece of the territory's legal and social history. He became a martyr for the rule of law, a figure whose name was invoked whenever the conversation turned to the necessity of a fair and protected judiciary. For young law students and aspiring public servants in American Samoa, his career became a model of what it meant to serve a diverse community with honor and impartiality. But his death also served as a sobering lesson in the reality of the human condition. It proved that even in an environment defined by deep religious faith and strong social cohesion, the seeds of toxic resentment can still find fertile ground. The murder forced a territory-wide conversation about mental health, the resolution of personal disputes, and the dangers of allowing grievances to fester in the shadows. It was a collective loss of innocence that matured the territory, forcing it to confront the fact that it was not an island unto itself, immune to the types of senseless violence that plagued the rest of the world. The idyllic isolation of the South Pacific had been breached, and the community had to learn how to live in a world that was now both more guarded and more aware. The physical site of the tragedy, the parking lot behind what was once Trans nightclub, eventually underwent its own transformation. Nightclubs and entertainment venues often have a transient existence, and as the decades passed, the vibrant social scene of the mid-2000s faded into new iterations of island life. But for those who lived through that era, that specific stretch of asphalt remained hallowed and haunted ground. It is a mundane location that carries a weight that is invisible to the casual observer but felt deeply by those who remember the sirens and the shock of that February night. It stands as a silent monument to the moment when the peace of the island was shattered by the thrust of a long knife, a place where a life of immense value was discarded in a matter of seconds. The contrast between the mundane nature of the setting and the monumental impact of the event continues to be one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. It serves as a reminder that the most significant shifts in a society's history often happen in the most unremarkable of places under the indifferent glow of a streetlight. Ultimately, the legacy of Judge Park Chung-kyu is a story of the enduring power of the law in the face of absolute savagery. The man who sought to destroy him, driven by a personal darkness that the rest of the island could scarcely comprehend, ultimately failed in his primary objective. He succeeded in ending a life, but he failed in wounding the institution that the life represented. The judicial system of American Samoa did not buckle under the weight of the assassination. Instead, it responded with a measured, thorough, and absolute application of the very principles Judge Park held dear. The trial and the subsequent life sentence for Taya Jr. Fatupaya demonstrated that the scales of justice, while they can be violently tipped, possess an inherent gravity that eventually brings them back into balance. This was the final victory of the judge over his attacker. The system proved to be stronger than the violence directed against it, and the law proved to be more durable than the individual who administered it. Today, as the Pacific tides continue to rise and fall against the shores of Tutuila, and as the lush greenery of the volcanic peaks continues to dominate the horizon, there is a sense of a peace that has been reclaimed. But it is a different kind of peace than the one that existed before Judge Park walked into that parking lot. It is a peace that has been tested by blood and tempered by the fire of a long, public mourning. It is a peace that acknowledges the presence of the shadows while choosing to live in the light. The story of the judge from Korea who became a pillar of a South Pacific island is a reminder of the best of what we can achieve through integration and service, while his tragic end is a warning of the worst of what we can do to one another. As we close this chapter on one of the most tiyankak and significant crimes in the history of American Samoa, we are left with the image of a man who gave everything to the law, and a community that, in remembering him, found the strength to protect the justice he loved. The name Park Chung-kyu remains etched not just on a headstone or in a legal textbook, but in the collective soul of a territory that learned, through a terrible price, that its greatest strength lies in the courage to uphold the truth, even when the darkness feels overwhelming. The ocean remains vast, the islands remain small, and the memory of the judge remains as a steady, guiding light across the deep waters of time. As the calendar turned to February 2026, marking exactly 2 decades since that catastrophic night in Tago Pago, the territory of American Samoa found itself in a moment of profound, quiet reflection. 20 years is a significant span of time in the life of a small island community. It is long enough for a generation to be born and raised in a world that never knew the physical presence of Judge Park Chung-kyu. Yet it is not nearly long enough to erase the shadow cast by his absence. The tropical sun still rises over the jagged, verdant peaks of Tutuila, and the trade wines still carry the scent of salt and hibiscus through the streets of the capital. But there is an invisible weight to the air that persists. To walk through the harbor district today is to walk through a landscape that has been subtly but permanently altered by a single act of violence. The memory of the judge has transitioned from a sharp, immediate pain into a foundational element of the island's historical consciousness. It is a story told in hushed tones to newcomers, a cautionary tale whispered in the villages, and a solemn reminder of the fragility of the peace that the residents so dearly cherish. The 20th anniversary of the murder saw a small, dignified gathering of the Korean community and members of the territorial judiciary at a memorial site overlooking the harbor. In the heavy, humid heat of a February afternoon, the atmosphere was one of somber resilience. For the Korean Samoan families who have called this island home for decades, the anniversary was a moment to reaffirm their place in the fabric of the territory. They looked back on the life of Judge Park not just as a victim of a terrible crime, but as the man who proved that their community could reach the highest levels of American Samoan society. His legacy in 2026 is seen in the young Korean Samoan lawyers who now walk the halls of the High Court, inspired by a man they only know through photographs and stories. The bridge that Judge Park built between cultures did not collapse when he fell. Instead, it was reinforced by the collective determination of those he left behind. The tragedy of his death, while still a source of immense grief, has become the soil from which a deeper, more integrated communal identity has grown. In the stark, sterile confines of the correctional facility where Taya Jr. Fatupaya has now spent 2 decades of his life, the passage of time carries a different, more stagnant weight. For the man who shattered the peace of the island, the world outside has moved on, evolving in ways he can only imagine from behind the bars of a cell. The sentence of life without the possibility of parole is a slow, methodical reckoning. In the small, enclosed ecosystem of American Samoa, the presence of the killer is still felt, a lingering reminder of the capacity for darkness that exists even in paradise. Fatupaya's name has become synonymous with a specific type of tragedy, the personal grievance that mutates into a public catastrophe. His long years of incarceration serve as the ultimate validation of the system he tried to wound. The administrative court, the very institution he targeted through the person of the judge, continues to function, its gavels falling with a regularity that mocks his attempt to silence it. The silence of his prison cell stands in permanent contrast to the enduring voice of the law that Judge Park so faithfully represented. The physical setting of the crime, the parking lot behind what was once Trans nightclub, has seen the inevitable decay and renewal that comes with 20 years of island life. The neon signs that once flickered in the tropical night have long since been extinguished, and the vibrant social scene of 2006 has migrated to newer establishments. Yet, for the older residents of Pago Pago, that stretch of asphalt remains a site of profound significance. They remember the sirens, the yellow tape, and the feeling of a world being torn apart. Even in 2026, there is a tendency for voices to drop when passing that area at night. It remains a dark spot in the geography of the island, a place where the illusion of absolute safety was discarded. This lingering unease is the true tax of violence. It is the permanent loss of the ability to look at a mundane space without seeing the ghosts of what happened there. The parking lot is a monument to the moment the island grew up, trading its youthful innocence for a more guarded, mature understanding of the world. Within the halls of the High Court of American Samoa, the impact of Judge Park's life and death continues to shape the daily administration of justice. The enhanced security measures that were once seen as a temporary reaction to a crisis have become the unremarkable standard. The metal detectors, the restricted access, and the constant presence of security personnel are the new normal for a generation of legal professionals. But beyond the physical barriers, there is a deeper, more philosophical legacy. The murder of a judge forced the territory to confront the unique pressures of its judicial system. It led to a renewed focus on the protection of judges and the need for a legal culture that can withstand the intense personal and familial pressures of a small community. The memory of Judge Park serves as a constant, silent advisor to those who sit on the bench today. His career is a reminder of the dignity and impartiality required of the office, while his death is a reminder of the courage it takes to hold the gavel in a land where everyone knows your name. As we look back from the vantage point of 2 decades, the story of Judge Park Chinky takes on a universal quality that transcends the specific geography of the South Pacific. It is a story about the collision of the modern legal world and the ancient, deeply personal world of traditional village life. It is a story about the immigrant experience, the pursuit of justice, and the devastating power of a single man's resentment. But most of all, it is a story about the resilience of a community. American Samoa did not let this tragedy define it in a negative sense. It did not descend into a cycle of recrimination or allow the violence to tear its cultural groups apart. Instead, it used the pain of the loss to strengthen its institutions and to reaffirm its commitment to the rule of law. The judge who was silenced in a parking lot continues to speak through the stability and the integrity of the system he left behind. His life was a testament to what can be built, and his death became a testament to what cannot be destroyed. The silence that falls over Pago Pago as the sun sets in 2026 is a peaceful one, but it is a peace that has been earned through the passage of time and the weight of memory. The harbor remains a place of stunning beauty, its deep waters reflecting the lights of the town and the stars above. The sounds of the night, the distant music, the rustle of palm fronds, the rhythmic breathing of the ocean are the same sounds that Judge Park would have heard on his final walk. The tragedy of February 24, 2006 is now a part of the rhythm of the island, a dark note in a complex, beautiful symphony. It serves as a reminder that the price of a civilized society is constant vigilance and a steadfast commitment to the values that protect us all. The judge's name, Park Jung-kyu, is no longer just a headline or a case file. It is a permanent part of the spirit of American Samoa, a guiding light that continues to shine across the 20 years that separate us from that fateful night. In the final analysis, the true meaning of this case is found not in the brutality of the act or the severity of the sentence, but in the enduring memory of the man. A life of service, honor, and integrity cannot be erased by a knife. The legacy of Judge Park is visible in every fair ruling, every peaceful resolution of a conflict, and every moment of cross-cultural understanding that occurs on the island today. He remains the architect of a better version of the territory, a man whose influence is felt in the very air of the courtroom. As the Pacific tides continue their eternal cycle, washing the shores of Tutuila, they carry with them the story of a judge who believed in the law, a community that stood by him, and a justice that, though delayed by a night of darkness, ultimately found its way home. The story concludes here, not with a sense of finality, but with the quiet, persistent echo of a life well lived and a peace that, though once broken, has been restored through the enduring power of the truth. The deep blue of the Pacific Ocean continues to surround the islands, a vast and indifferent witness to the human dramas that unfold upon the volcanic rock. But within that vastness, the small community of American Samoa has created something remarkable, a place where the memory of one man can change the course of history for the better. The murder of Judge Park Chung-kyu was a moment of profound darkness, but the 20 years that followed have been a long, steady march toward the light. The island is safer, the judiciary is stronger, and the community is more united because of the way it chose to remember him. The harbor of Pago Pago remains a sanctuary, and the memory of the judge remains its most faithful guardian, a silent sentinel standing watch over the peace of the South Pacific. This is the final word on the case of Judge Park, that his life was a gift to the island, his death was a tragedy for the world, and his legacy is a victory for us all. The night is quiet now, and the judge is at rest, his work continuing in the hands of those who still believe in the power of the law. The final light of the tropical sun dips below the horizon of the Pacific, casting a long amber glow across the waters of Pago Pago. And in this quietude, we find the concluding chapter of a story that has redefined the soul of a territory. To speak of Judge Park Chung-kyu today, 20 years after his life was so violently stolen, is to speak of the very architecture of memory in a place where the past and present are constantly in dialogue. In American Samoa, the land does not forget. The volcanic rock holds the heat of the day long after the stars appear, and the community holds the weight of its history with a similar, enduring intensity. As we reach the end of this narrative journey, we must move beyond the clinical details of the autopsy, the strategic maneuvers of the courtroom, and the rigid bars of a prison cell to find the deeper, more philosophical truth that this tragedy left in its wake. This is the story of the judge's piece of peace that was shattered in a nightclub parking lot but was painstakingly rebuilt through the collective will of a people who refused to let darkness become their defining characteristic. It is a meditation on the permanence of legacy in a world that is often defined by its transience. The legacy of Judge Park is most visible not in a monument of stone, but in the invisible infrastructure of the island's daily life. When we look at the administrative court today, we see an institution that carries the DNA of his commitment to fairness. The very nature of administrative law is often seen as dry or bureaucratic, dealing with the gears and cogs of government. But Judge Park understood that these gears are what keep a society moving toward justice. He saw the human face behind every regulation and the personal stakes in every bureaucratic dispute. In the 20 years since his death, that perspective has become the gold standard for the territory's public servants. There is a specific kind of integrity that is required to operate within a small, interconnected society, a need to be both a neighbor and an impartial arbiter. Judge Park mastered this balance, and in doing so, he provided a blueprint for how a modern legal system can thrive within the context of ancient traditions. His death forced the island to realize that the law is not just a set of rules written on paper. It is a living, breathing protection that requires constant nourishment and, occasionally, a terrifying level of sacrifice. The Korean community in American Samoa remains a vibrant and essential part of the island's character, and their journey over the last 2 decades is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The Han of the Korean soul, that unique blend of deep sorrow and unyielding hope, was put to the ultimate test on February 24, 2006. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, there were those who feared a retreat, a closing of ranks that would isolate the community from the rest of the island. But the opposite occurred. The tragedy acted as a bridge, drawing the Korean and Samoan populations into a shared space of mourning and mutual support. The scholarship funds, the community centers, and the cross-cultural dialogues that bear the judge's name are not just tributes. They are active, ongoing investments in the future of the territory. They represent a refusal to let a single act of hate dictate the terms of a relationship that has been built over generations. The success of the Korean diaspora in the South Pacific is now inextricably linked to the story of the judge who gave his life for the system that welcomed him. A narrative of belonging that is as deep and as permanent as the ocean itself. In the quiet, monitored halls of the correctional facility where Taya Jr. Fatupaia resides, the concept of time has been stripped of its meaning. To live a life without the possibility of parole is to exist in a permanent present. A static reality where the world outside continues to evolve while you remain frozen in the moment of your greatest transgression. The man who once thought a long knife could resolve a personal grievance has found that the law has a much longer, much more persistent reach. His incarceration is the ultimate refutation of his act. By removing him from the society he sought to disrupt, the territory has reaffirmed its commitment to the sanctity of life and the authority of the judiciary. There is a profound irony in the fact that the man who tried to silence a judge is now silenced by the very legal system that the judge served. His life in prison is a silent archive of a wasted potential, a cautionary tale about the toxic nature of resentment and the devastating consequences of choosing violence over dialogue. The island has moved on, his name appearing only in the footnotes of history, while the values he tried to destroy continue to flourish in the light. The end of innocence is a phrase often used to describe the impact of Judge Park's murder on American Samoa, but 20 years later, it feels more like an awakening of responsibility. The territory no longer relies on the geographical isolation of the Pacific to provide an automatic shield against the world's problems. Instead, it has built its own shields, logistical, legal, and psychological. The security measures at the High Court are not just about preventing another attack. They are about honoring the reality that justice is a precious and vulnerable thing that must be guarded. This maturity has changed the way the island sees itself. American Samoa in 2026 is a community that understands its own strength, a territory that has looked into the abyss of a political assassination and chosen to walk back toward the light of the rule of law. This transition from a known peace to a defended peace is the true legacy of 2006. It is a harder, more complex version of reality, but it is also a more honest one. The island has grown up, and in doing so, it has become a more resilient sanctuary for all who call it home. As we conclude this long-form exploration of one of the most tiunkek cases in the history of the South Pacific, we are left with the image of the empty bench. In the physical courtroom, the seat once occupied by Judge Park Chung-kyu has been filled by many talented and dedicated jurists over the last 2 decades. But in the spiritual sense, the bench remains a place of remembrance. It is a space where the values of integrity, fairness, and courage are constantly being weighed. The story of the judge is not a closed book. It is a living document that is updated every time a fair decision is reached, every time a conflict is resolved through reason, and every time a community chooses unity over division. The serial of this tragedy has reached its final episode, but the case file of Judge Park remains open in the hearts of those who remember his voice. The silence of the harbor at night is no longer a silence of ignorance. It is a silence of respect, a quiet acknowledgement of the man who stood in the darkness so that others could live in the light. The physical weapon, the long knife that caused so much devastation, is now a piece of cold steel locked away in a forensic archive, a relic of a moment of madness. It has no power anymore. Its edge has been dulled by the passage of time and the overwhelming weight of the justice that followed its use. In contrast, the words and rulings of Judge Park have only grown sharper and more significant with age. They continue to provide guidance and clarity in a complex world. This is the ultimate victory of the victim over the victimizer. The one who sought to destroy left behind a legacy of shame and isolation, while the one who was destroyed left behind a legacy of honor and communal strength. The Pacific Ocean, in its vast and eternal wisdom, continues to wash the shores of Tutuila, a rhythmic reminder that even the most violent storms eventually pass, leaving the island renewed and the horizon clear. The story of Judge Park Chung-kyu is a part of that ocean now deep, powerful, and enduring. Final thoughts lead us back to the family of the judge, the quiet survivors who have carried the heaviest burden of this tragedy. Their dignity and their refusal to seek vengeance in the traditional sense have been the true backbone of the island's healing process. They have shown the world that the most powerful response to a barbaric act is a life lived with grace and purpose. In 2026, they are the living monuments to the men they lost. Their presence in the community is a constant, gentle reminder that love is more durable than hate, and that a legacy is built not in a single moment of violence, but in the thousands of quiet moments of integrity that follow. As the sun sets once more over Pago Pago, we leave this story where it began in the heart of a small island that carries a big history. The judge's peace is finally secure, a testament to a man who believed in the law and a people who believed in him. The case file is closed, but the light he lit continues to shine across the deep blue waters of the South Pacific, a beacon of justice for all time. The harbor is still now, the lights of the town reflecting in the dark water like stars that have fallen to earth. The sounds of the night are a gentle symphony of island life, the distant hum of a generator, the soft laughter from a nearby fail, the steady, rhythmic pulse of the tide. In this piece, we find the final resolution of the 2006 tragedy. It is not a piece that ignores what happened, but a piece that has integrated it into the very soul of the community. American Samoa is a land of survivors, a territory that knows how to weather the storm and how to find the path back to the shore. The memory of Judge Park Chung-kyu is the compass that has guided them through the darkest night of their modern history. As we fade to silence, we are reminded that even in the smallest of places, a single life of honor can change everything. The story is told, the justice is served, and the judge is finally, eternally at rest. The long walk through the parking lot has ended, and the light of the morning is just beyond the horizon. This is the end of the script, the end of the story, and the beginning of a forever defined by the judge's peace. The passage of time in the South Pacific is an entity that behaves differently than it does in the sprawling, clock-driven metropolises of the American mainland. On the island of Tutuila, time is often perceived through the lens of natural cycles, the slow, inevitable erosion of the volcanic coastline, the rhythmic expansion of the rainforest after a season of heavy rain, and the gradual shifting of the coral reefs that encircle the territory like a protective, underwater fortress. In this final, expansive contemplation of the life and death of Judge Park Chung-kyu, we must look beyond the immediate ripples of the 2006 tragedy to understand the afterlife of the case the way it has settled into the very bedrock of American Samoan history. By the year 2026, the murder is no longer a current event, but it has become a profound piece of cultural and legal folklore. It is the story that defines the modern era of the territory, a marker that separates the old Samoa of perceived invulnerability from the new Samoa of matured, defended justice. To fully grasp the magnitude of this evolution, one must look at the specific way the story is told in the quiet corners of the island today, where the legacy of the judge continues to serve as a silent, unwavering guardian of the peace. The administrative court of American Samoa, where Judge Park once held his gavel with such steady authority, has evolved into a symbol of institutional resilience that is studied by legal scholars across the Pacific. In the 20 years since the bench was left empty on that tragic Friday night, the court has transformed from a functional governmental department into a revered sanctuary of the rule of law. The judicial officers who have followed in the judge's footsteps carry with them a specific, heavy awareness of the sanctity of the robe. They understand that their work is not just about resolving disputes over regulations or immigration status. It is about maintaining a delicate social balance that was once nearly destroyed by a single man's resentment. The legacy of Judge Park in 2026 is visible in the way these jurists handle their cases with an almost sacred level of care. They operate with the knowledge that the law is the only thing standing between a peaceful community and the chaos of personal vengeance. This institutional hardening is the ultimate tribute to the victim. The murderer, Taya Jr. Fatupaya, sought to decapitate the system by removing one of its most prominent figures, but his act of violence only served to solidify the system's resolve, making the administrative court a more formidable and respected pillar of the territory than it ever was before. The sociological synthesis that Judge Park embodied the bridge between the Korean diaspora and the indigenous Samoan population has reached a state of beautiful, permanent maturity. In the 2 decades following his death, the Korean Samoan community has flourished, moving past the initial period of fear and mourning into an era of deep, ancestral integration. The children of the families who arrived in the 1970s and 1980s are now the leaders of the 2020s, and they carry the story of the judge as a foundational myth of their community. For them, Judge Park is the first ancestor of their legal identity on the island, a man who paid the ultimate price to prove that they belonged in the highest circles of Samoan power. This integration is not just a success story of immigration. It is a victory of the Fasamo itself. The traditional Samoan culture proved its capacity to absorb tragedy and to protect those who contribute to the communal good. The distinction between Korean and Samoan in the legal halls of Pago Pago has blurred into a unified identity of American Samoan justice. A legacy that Judge Park built with his life and sealed with his blood. The figure of Tayo Jr. Fatupaya, now an aging man within the walls of a correctional facility, has become a different kind of symbol for the territory. He is no longer a source of active terror, but rather a cautionary tale that is used in the training of every new law enforcement officer and social worker in the islands. The Fatupaya precedent is not a legal ruling, but a psychological one, a reminder of how quickly an unaddressed personal grievance can mutate into a lethal obsession in a small, close community. The investigation into his motives and his background has become a case study in the importance of mental health awareness and conflict resolution within the village structure. By 2026, the territory has implemented new programs aimed at identifying and mediating long-standing disputes before they can escalate to the point of no return. In this way, even the darkest part of the story has been recycled into a tool for prevention. The man who tried to destroy the peace has inadvertently provided the map for how to protect it, a final, ironic layer to the tragedy that would have likely appealed to the judge's own sense of administrative order. The geography of Pago Pago in 2026 remains a place of stunning, almost defiant beauty. The harbor, with its deep blue waters and the surrounding green cathedrals of the volcanic mountains, looks much as it did a century ago. But the spirit of the town has been tempered by the weight of the last 20 years. The parking lot behind the old nightclub site is now part of a redesigned urban landscape, but the memory of the asphalt persists. It is a place where the air seems slightly cooler, a place where the bustling energy of the capital takes a momentary, respectful pause. This geography of memory is essential to the identity of American Samoa. It is a land that remembers its martyrs, and Judge Park is undoubtedly one of them. His story is woven into the very fabric of the streets he walked, a reminder that the cost of a civilized society is often a heavy one. When the evening fog rolls down from the peaks and settles over the harbor, it feels as though the island itself is holding a vigil for the man who believed in the power of the truth. The final reflection on this case must center on the concept of the enduring voice. A judge's voice is typically one of reason, evidence, and measured judgment. On February 24, 2006, that voice was abruptly and brutally silenced. But the history of American Samoa over the next 20 years proved that you cannot silence the law with a knife. The voice of Judge Park Chung-kyu has been amplified through the thousands of rulings that have followed him, through the increased security of his successors, and through the unwavering dignity of his family and his community. The serial of his life did not end in a parking lot. It continued in every fair trial, every peaceful village meeting, and every moment of cross-cultural harmony that has defined the territory's modern era. He remains the silent architect of the peace that the residents of Tutuila enjoy today, a figure whose presence is felt in the very stability of the ground they walk upon. As the sun sets over the Pacific in 2026, and the lights of Pago Pago begin to twinkle like a reflection of the stars, there is a profound sense of closure that only 20 years of justice can provide. The case of Judge Park is no longer a wound. It is a scar-strong, permanent mark that shows the island has healed but will never forget the lesson it learned. The story of the judge from Korea who became the soul of a South Pacific judiciary is a universal narrative of the human struggle for order in a chaotic world. It is a reminder that while violence is sudden and destructive, the law is patient, persistent, and ultimately victorious. The harbor remains a sanctuary, the mountains remain guardians, and the memory of the judge remains a beacon. The deep, rhythmic breathing of the ocean continues to wash the shores of American Samoa, carrying with it the echoes of a life that stood for something greater than itself. In the final analysis, the story of Judge Park Chung-kyu is a testament to the fact that the smallest of places can teach the largest of lessons. American Samoa, a tiny territory in the middle of a vast ocean, faced a crisis that would have shaken a nation 10 times its size. And yet, it did not break. It chose the path of the law, the path of the Fa Samoa, and the path of the truth. The judge's sacrifice was not in vain. It was the foundation upon which a more secure, more just, and more united society was built. As we conclude this long-form journey through the shadows of 2006 into the light of 2026, we are left with a feeling of profound respect for the man, the community, and the system that survived the night. The case file is finally and completely closed, but the light that Judge Park lit in the heart of the Pacific will continue to shine, a steady and enduring flame that the darkness could never extinguish. The night is over, the morning has arrived, and the peace of the islands is, at long last, absolute. This is the final word, the final note in the symphony of a life that changed the history of a territory forever. The judge is at rest, and the law he loved is his eternal monument. The finality of a 20-year journey through the corridors of justice and memory brings us back to the very edge of the Pacific, where the story of Judge Park Chung-kyu has finally settled into the quiet, enduring rhythm of American Samoa. As we reach the absolute conclusion of this deep dive into the events of February 24, 2006, and the subsequent legal reckoning of 2007, we are forced to confront the ultimate question that every true crime narrative eventually poses. What is the true weight of a single life in the grand, sweeping history of a community? In the case of the distinguished jurist from the administrative court, the answer is found not in the sudden, sharp violence of a long knife in a darkened parking lot, but in the 2 decades of peace that have been built upon the foundation of his sacrifice. The murder of Judge Park was a rupture in the space-time of Pago Pago, a moment where the unthinkable became real and the sanctuary of the islands was breached by a personal, lethal resentment. But as we stand here in 2026, looking back across the expanse of time, we see that the rupture has been healed not by forgetting, but by the relentless, daily application of the laws he died to protect. This is the final verdict of history that the light of the law is far more durable than the darkness of any single act of malice. The man behind the violence, Tai Jr. Fatupaya, remains a figure of profound isolation within the correctional system of the territory. His life since the 2007 sentencing has been a study in the absolute nature of the law's response to the slaughter of its representatives. In the small, enclosed society of Tutuila, the presence of a man serving life without the possibility of parole for the murder of a judge is a permanent, sobering fixture. He is the living archive of the failure of a man to resolve his grievances through reason and the failure of a violent act to achieve anything other than the permanent removal of the perpetrator from the world he sought to influence. His incarceration for the past 20 years has served as a silent, ongoing deterrent. A clear signal that the territory of American Samoa will never tolerate the targeted assassination of its judicial officers. The junior Fatupaya who walked into that parking lot with a heart full of rage has been replaced by a man who is a footnote in the very legal history he tried to disrupt. His sentence is the final, unshakable word of the system, a testament to the fact that while a life can be taken in a matter of seconds, the accountability for that act lasts for a lifetime. For the Korean community of American Samoa, the 20-year mark represents a transition from the era of the tragedy to the era of the triumph. The murder of Judge Park Chung-kyu was a trial by fire for the diaspora, a moment that tested their faith in their adopted home and their resilience in the face of targeted brutality. In the 2 decades since the trial, they have not only persevered but have ascended to even greater heights of social and civic contribution. The legacy of the judge is seen in every Korean Samoan child who enters a classroom with a sense of pride and in every business that flourishes in the Harbor District. They have taken the grief of 2006 and transformed it into a powerful, communal energy that has enriched the entire territory. The bridge that Judge Park built between the immigrant experience and the indigenous power structures has become a permanent landmark of the island's cultural geography. In 2026, his story is no longer a source of division or fear, but a shared narrative of belonging and courage that belongs to every resident of American Samoa, regardless of their heritage. The physical landscape of Pago Pago has continued to evolve, yet it remains haunted by the dignity of the man who once walked its streets. The administrative court, once a place of mundane bureaucratic disputes, has been elevated in the public consciousness to a site of profound moral significance. Every ruling that comes out of that court today carries the weight of the history that was written in blood in 2006. The judges who have followed Park Chung-kyu do not take their safety or their authority for granted. They move through their work with a heightened sense of the importance of every decision, knowing that the fair administration of the law is the only thing that prevents the return of the shadows. This institutional maturity is perhaps the most significant legacy of the case. American Samoa has moved past the naive assumption that its isolation is a shield and has replaced it with the active, vigilant protection of its democratic and judicial values. The territory is a more mature, more reflective, and ultimately a safer place because it had the courage to look directly at the horror of the Park murder and choose the path of the law. As we conclude this final chapter, we must return to the image of the harbor, the deep, blue sanctuary that defines life on Tutuila. The Pacific Ocean is a witness to the passage of time, its tides washing away the immediate stains of history while preserving the deep, underwater currents of memory. The murder of Judge Park was a storm that broke over the harbor 20 years ago, but the waters have long since returned to their steady, rhythmic pulse. The case file of the parking lot at Trans nightclub is now a closed book, its pages filled with the testimony of witnesses, the findings of forensic experts, and the finality of a life sentence. But the serial of the judge's influence remains an ongoing narrative. He lives on in the integrity of the courts, in the unity of the community, and in the peace that allows the children of Pago Pago to walk through their town without fear. The long knife of 2006 has been defeated by the enduring gavel of justice. The final thoughts of this long-form true crime exploration are dedicated to the concept of the enduring peace in a world that often feels dominated by sudden, senseless acts of violence. The story of American Samoa's response to the killing of Judge Park Chung-kyu is a beacon of hope. It is a reminder that a community can face the darkest part of itself and emerge stronger, more united, and more committed to the truth. The judge did not die in vain. He died as a martyr for the idea that we are a society of laws, not of men driven by resentment. His life was a gift of service, and his death was a call to action that the territory answered with a resounding and permanent commitment to justice. As the night falls over the South Pacific in 2026, the lights of Pago Pago continue to shine, reflecting off the water like 1,000 small promises to keep the peace. The judge's walk through the parking lot has ended, and he has found his way home to the halls of history where his name will forever be synonymous with honor, courage, and the absolute victory of the law. The silence that now concludes this series is not the silence of the grave, but the silence of a peace that has been restored and defended. It is the silence of a courtroom before the judge enters, the silence of a harbor before the dawn, and the silence of a community that knows its own strength. The case of Park Chung-kyu versus Taya Jr. Fatupaya is over, the verdict is final, and the legacy is secure. We leave the island of Tutuila as we found it a place of immense beauty and complex history, but now a place that carries a new, profound understanding of what it means to protect the justice that keeps us whole. The story is complete. The voice of the narrator fades into the sound of the ocean, and the memory of the judge remains as a permanent, guiding star over the deep blue waters of American Samoa. This is the end of the narrative, the end of the investigation, and the final, enduring word on a tragedy that became a triumph of the human spirit. The light of the law continues to shine, and the shadows have been pushed back, once and for all, into the depths of the past. The judge's peace is now the island's peace, and it shall remain so for all the years to come. As the last echoes of this story dissipate into the humid air of the Pacific, we are left with a final, lingering thought on the nature of the true in true crime. The truth of this case was never just about who held the knife. It was about who held the line. Judge Park held the line of integrity until his final breath. The police held the line of truth during the investigation. And the people of American Samoa held the line of justice during the trial and the decades that followed. This is the ultimate lesson of Pago Pago, that the line is stronger than the blade. The story of 2006 is a tragedy that we must never forget, but the story of 2026 is a triumph that we must always celebrate. The case is closed, the justice is served, and the peace is absolute. We sign off now, leaving the judge to his eternal rest and the island to its enduring light. The Pacific tide continues to turn, and the history of American Samoa continues to grow, forever marked by the man who gave everything to keep the scales of justice in balance. This is the end, and in this ending, we find the beginning of a forever defined by honor. The vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean remains the ultimate witness to the passage of time on the island of Tutuila, its rhythmic tide serving as a constant, low-frequency hum that underlies every heartbeat of American Samoa. As we move into this final, expansive reflection upon the tragedy of Judge Park Chung-kyu, we must consider the concept of the echo the way a single, sharp sound of violence in 2006 continues to resonate through the silence of 2026. In the world of true crime, we often focus on the explosion, the immediate impact of the act that shatters the lives of the victims and the peace of the community. But the deeper truth of a case like this is found in the long, slow dissipation of that energy, the way it settles into the soil, the water, and the very souls of the people who are left to carry the memory forward. To understand American Samoa to decades after the death of its most prominent jurist is to understand a society that has integrated a nightmare into its waking life, transforming a moment of profound trauma into a lasting monument of communal resilience. This is the final chapter of the judge's piece, an exploration of how the unthinkable becomes the foundation for a more certain, more guarded future. The physical presence of the administrative court in Pago Pago today is a testament to this transformation. When you walk through those doors in 2026, you are not just entering a government building. You are entering a space that has been spiritually and physically fortified by the events of February 24th. 2006, the year inside the courtroom seems to carry a different weight than it did in the years before the attack. There is a solemnity that transcends the mere function of the law. The current judges who occupy the bench do so with a profound awareness that they are the guardians of a flame that was once nearly extinguished. They are the successors of a man whose commitment to the administrative order was so absolute that it made him a target for the most primitive kind of resentment. Every case they hear, from the most minor immigration dispute to the most complex governmental regulation, is now treated with a level of care that borders on the religious. They understand that the small laws are the ones that hold the fabric of the community together, and that the protection of the judge is the protection of the people. This institutional memory is the true shield of the territory, a psychological barrier that is far more effective than any metal detector or armed guard. The youth of American Samoa, those who were not yet born or were only infants when the sirens wailed behind Tran's nightclub, now represent the future of this legacy. For them, Judge Park Chung-kyu is a figure of historical legend, a man whose name is synonymous with the very idea of justice. They learn about his life and his death in their social studies classes and through the stories told by their elders during evening prayers. In this way, the tragedy has become a teaching tool, a means of instilling the values of the Fa Samoa and the rule of law into a new generation. These young people do not carry the immediate trauma of the event, but they carry the responsibility of the aftermath. They are the ones who will ensure that the bridge between the Korean and Samoan cultures remains strong. And they are the ones who will continue to demand that their leaders be protected and respected. The story of the judge has become a part of their cultural DNA, a reminder that their small island territory has the capacity to face the darkest of challenges and emerge with its integrity intact. This generational transfer of memory is the final victory of the judge over the man who sought to erase him from history. In the quiet, reflective spaces of the Korean community, the memory of Judge Park has taken on a quality of ancestor worship that is both traditional and modern. For the families who have made Tutuila their home, the judge remains the great ancestor of their success, a figure whose sacrifice validated their presence on the island forever. The initial period of mourning has long since passed, replaced by a quiet, steady pride. Every year, on the anniversary of the murder, the community gathers not just to weep, but to celebrate the life that gave so much to the territory. They look at the integrated society they have helped build, a society where a Korean name is a name of authority and respect, and they see the judge's work continuing in every successful business, every academic achievement, and every peaceful interaction. They have proven that you cannot kill a community by killing its leader. You only give that community a reason to grow deeper roots. The story of the judge is the story of their own belonging, a narrative of faith and perseverance that will be told as long as there are people of Korean descent on the shores of American Samoa. The figure of the perpetrator, Taya Jr. Fatopaya, continues to exist as a shadow on the periphery of the island's consciousness, a living reminder of the consequences of choosing the path of violence. His life in prison is a slow, methodical erasure, a stark contrast to the expanding legacy of the man he murdered. In 2026, he is an old man, a relic of a moment of madness that the world has moved beyond. His presence in the correctional system is a silent, ongoing affirmation of the power of the law. He is not a monster to be feared, but a man who is the ultimate proof of his own failure. By removing him from the society he sought to wound, the territory has reaffirmed its commitment to the sanctity of life and the authority of the judiciary. His incarceration is the final, unshakable word of the system, a testament to the fact that while a life can be taken in a matter of seconds, the accountability for that act lasts for a lifetime. The island has moved on, his name appearing only as a cautionary footnote in the history of a territory that has learned how to protect its peace. As we reach the absolute conclusion of this podcast series, we must look one last time at the harbor of Pago Pago, the deep, blue sanctuary that has been the backdrop for this entire tragedy. The harbor is a place of arrivals and departures, a place where the world meets the island and where the island meets the world. The murder of Judge Park was a moment of arrival for a new kind of violence, a dark passenger that slipped onto the island under the cover of night. But the 20 years that followed have been a long, steady process of departure, as the community worked to push that darkness back out to sea. Today, the harbor is a place of peace once more, but it is a peace that is no longer taken for granted. It is a peace that has been earned through the passage of time, the weight of memory, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The water remains calm, the mountains remain steady, and the memory of the judge remains as a lighthouse, a guiding light that continues to shine across the deep blue waters of the South Pacific. The serial of this case has been a journey through the darkest and brightest parts of the human experience. We have seen the depth of a killer's resentment and the height of a community's resilience. We have seen the vulnerability of a great man and the strength of the system he served. We have seen the pain of a family and the dignity of their survival. Through it all, the common thread has been the enduring power of the law. Judge Park Chung-kyu believed that the law was the only thing that could protect us from the chaos of our own impulses, and in the end, he was right. The law was the thing that caught his killer, the law was the thing that delivered the verdict, and the law is the thing that continues to guard the peace of American Samoa today. This is the ultimate truth of the case, that the gavel is more powerful than the blade, and that the voice of justice, once raised, can never be silenced. In the final analysis, the story of Judge Park is a universal one. It is a story about what happens when the unthinkable occurs in a place that believes it is safe. It is a story about the resilience of the human spirit and the durability of communal bonds. It is a story about the importance of protecting those who protect us. As the final notes of this narrative fade into the hum of the Pacific, we are left with a feeling of profound respect for the territory of American Samoa and the man who became its most significant martyr. The judge is at rest now, his work continuing in the hands of those who still believe in the power of the truth. The long walk through the parking lot has ended, and the light of the morning is just beyond the horizon. The case file is finally and completely closed, but the legacy of Park Chung-kyu will remain forever, a steady and enduring flame in the heart of the Pacific. The night is quiet now in Pago Pago, the stars reflecting in the dark water like 1,000 small promises to keep the peace. The sounds of the island, the rustle of the palms, the distant music, the rhythmic breathing of the ocean are a symphony of a life that has moved on. We leave this story here in the heart of the South Pacific, where a small island taught the world a big lesson about justice. The judge's name is etched in the stone of the court and in the hearts of the people, a permanent reminder that honor is more durable than violence. The sun will rise again over the volcanic peaks, and a new day will begin in American Samoa, a day that is safer, stronger, and more just because of the man who gave everything to protect it. This is the end of the script, the end of the story, and the beginning of a forever defined by the judge's peace. The Pacific tide continues to turn, and the history of the island continues to grow, forever marked by the man who stood for the law. As the final light fades, we are reminded that in the world of true crime, the most important part of the story is not the crime itself, but what happens next. American Samoa chose to respond to tragedy with unity, to respond to violence with justice, and to respond to loss with memory. This is the true success of the case. The judge is gone, but the justice he loved is here to stay. The harbor is still, the mountains are tall, and the peace of the islands is, at long last, absolute. This is our final sign-off, a last tribute to a life well lived and a legacy that will never fade. The story is told, the justice is served, and the memory of Judge Park Chung-kyu is secure for all time. Good night from the Pacific, where the light of the law continues to shine, a beacon of hope for every community that believes in the power of the truth. The echo has finally reached the shore, and the silence that remains is a silence of respect. The case file is closed. The end.